Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto comes to get Rias from Highschool DxD part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Leaf Village Hospital. You mean it's finally ready? A young man with sun-kissed blonde hair and 3 whisker marks shouted. He also had blue eyes, and if you look deep into them, you'd feel like you would get lost in an ocean. Yes, now shut up and let me attach it already, said a seemingly young woman with a slightly darker shade of blonde hair and an incredible chest that no single woman should ever have. On top of her forehead was a diamond-shaped seal that you would end up noticing first before her chocolate-colored eyes. These two are Naruto Uzumaki and Tsunade Senju. Tsunade was the 5th Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves and a world-renowned medical genius. After Naruto's fight with Sasuke Uchiha at the Valley of the End, they both lost an arm, but Naruto was finally able to succeed in bringing his first bond back from the brink of darkness. Tsunade did some research based off of her grandfather's cells, now known as Hashirama cells, and was working on a prosthetic arm for Naruto. They're all done. Now try to use a simple jutsu, it should help acclimate the arm with your chakra coils, and you'll be all set. You got it, Granny. As he said that, Tsunade had a tick mark appear on her face, and she was about to yell when a sudden flash of light appeared and seemingly kidnapped them both. The Cult Research Club. Good morning, said a brown-haired young man, with eyes that matched his hair color, wore what seemed to be a school uniform. His name is Issei Haidu, a young man who was recently reincarnated into a devil, and he holds the legendary boosted gear. Oh, you're here today? How are your injuries? Asked a beautiful young lady with hair as crimson as blood itself and eyes that were bluish green. She also had some surprising assets, as you could say. Her name is Rias Gremory, and she is the heir to the House of Gremory, one of the 72 pillars of pure-blooded devils. I'm doing good, but with Asia's healing I feel better than ever. It seems she's already doing her part as a bishop. Suddenly, before any more can be said, a flash of light surrounds the two and a young lady outside the club room. As the light disappeared, Naruto and Tsunade found themselves in a mysterious room. It contained what could possibly be the biggest TV they have ever seen in their life, along with a mysterious book that seemingly held no title. As the two looked around, Naruto asked, "Granny, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm doing just fine, brat. How's the arm?" "It's good, I can feel it kicking in, and it's getting easier to move." Suddenly the two tensed as once again another mysterious light flashed, and what came out of it surprised the both of them. They saw 2 young ladies and a young man fall out of the light as they landed on their butts. They appeared to be wearing some uniform, for what they didn't know, but they seemed normal enough. "But are you okay?" asked a brown-haired youth, then he noticed a blonde-haired young woman with them. Asia. Asia was a blonde whose hair reached all the way down to her butt. She had emerald-colored eyes and she looked innocent, but she also looked lost and confused. Rias was unfortunately interrupted. "Issei-san. What's going on?" Asia yelled. Issei ran over to her and he began to check her over, looking for any type of injuries she could have had. At this situation, Rias couldn't help but feel a little jealous of how affectionate Issei was towards Asia. Suddenly next to Rias was a blonde-haired young man who introduced himself. "Yo. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, are you doing okay? It looks like your friend is a bit busy." Put off by the unexpected friendly approach, Rias stumbled a bit before she regained her composure and introduced herself. "My name is Rias Gremory and it's nice to meet you, Uzumaki-san." She then began to introduce Issei and Asia as Issei still fussed over Asia. "The boy is Issei Haidu and the girl is Asia Argento." It's nice to meet you, I'm Issei, but my friends usually call me Ice." "It's nice to meet you, Uzumaki-san, I'm Asia Argento." Seeing the strangers act civilized, Tsunade walked towards the group and introduced herself. All Issei got out of her introduction was that she had a giant pair of bazookas in her name. "I'm Tsunade Senju, it's nice to meet you. By any chance do y'all what's going on and why we've been dragged here?" Before anyone had a chance to respond, a voice chimed out. "I'm sure you're all confused as to why you're here, but I just wanted y'all to read this book." Naruto began to complain about how he was going to have to read a book. "I don't want to read no stupid book. This involves you the most, you fool." "Hey. Anyways, moving on. I'm offering you the opportunity to see into a different path that could have happened if the 4th Great Ninja War turned out differently." Rias and the others didn't have a clue to what was happening, but clearly it involved Naruto, so they decided to stay quiet and see what happened between Naruto and the mysterious voice. Meanwhile, Tsunade was having none of it and chimed in, "Wait, so you mean there was a chance that Naruto could have failed and we all would have been stuck in the infinite Tsukuyomi? If you want your answers, read the book. Just know that after the war, Naruto ends up in a world rather different and far more advanced than your own." Naruto began to think. If this book involved another version of him, how strong was this version of him? Could he possibly learn something new from the book? So many questions popped up that you could physically see smoke flowing out of his head as he kept on thinking. Issei began noticing this and began to ask is he okay? Oh, don't worry about him, he's just an idiot letting his imagination go wild. Tsunade answered. Asia asked the important question, excuse me, but who's going to read the book? Everyone just kind of look around, but eventually Issei spoke up with an uncharacteristically serious face that was soon ruined the moment he began to speak. I'll do it. Maybe this book will show me getting it on with, but before Issei could finish he felt a chill go through his spine as he saw Tsunade glaring at him like he was a piece of trash. Naruto couldn't help but sweat drop, there was another pervert here with Tsunade standing 2 feet away from him, he couldn't help but feel sorry for the poor boy as his face would inevitably kiss the floor. As Issei got ready, a couch popped into existence and everyone sat down. Alright. It'll just start now. Issei cleared his throat and began to read, and as he read the TV turned on and gave the others visuals to what Issei was reading. Issei Haidu was speechless at the flag event happening in front of him. This pretty girl had walked up to him out of nowhere, called for him by name, and she even asked him, I'm sorry what did you say? GG's, why are you making me say it again? The beautiful young girl with long black hair whined as she tried to work up her courage again with a burning red face. I've seen Haidu-kun walk around this way for a while now and every time I saw you I got nervous. My knees got weak and my heart started to race. And I've wanted to say this to you for some time now. She took a deep breath. Haidu-kun. Will you go out with me? Issei looked at the girl called Yuma Mono as time froze around him. Just earlier today he had dreamed of getting a girlfriend to grab her wonderful dot. He had peeked on all the girls in the changing room so he could see their naked bodies. And he was beaten up because he was a vile and hated pervert. And yet somehow, this beautiful, lovely girl wanted to be his girlfriend. What could he say? What was he thinking? Kia. Yes. Of course I'll go out with you. Issei could feel the withering glare from Tsunade, but before he could get a word out, Naruto interrupted his train of thought by saying, by the sage, he's just like pervy sage. Tsunade couldn't help but groan at the thought of a reincarnated Jiraiya running around this room. Unfortunately for her, Issei was in this room and he would peek the moment an opportunity presented itself. Devil. Guess I need to thank you for, run. Get away from JJ just one last time. You don't have to. I'm doing this for BZZTBZZTBZZTBZZ. A hand came down and smacked the alarm clock silent, leaving him in silence while the man pushed himself up. His messy, unruly blonde hair parted slightly to reveal a blue eye hidden behind the bangs. He looked up at the only window in the room and had to close his eyes to not be blinded by the sunlight. He looked between the crummy cover, stained futon, dirty room, bug-infested floors and pile of old clothes. He just sighed and rubbed the back of his head. I'll go today. Nothing better to do. Naruto couldn't help but perk up at the mention of his description and ask, what I wanna know is how I get to your world. It doesn't seem like I'm too happy either because that room looks worse than the crappy apartment I had when I was a kid. I'm not sure how you would arrive, but maybe it'll be explained as we read further in. Rias began to theorize. Devil, there she is. Himejima Onasama. You look so lovely today. Do you want us to carry your bags for you, One-sama? We love you, Akeno Onasama. Ra. It's good to see you all today. The beautiful smiling ponytailed senior woman responded cheerfully to all of her loving crowd. The boys and girls of Kuo always did this sort of ritual when they saw her walk through the halls. It's the kind of expectation you have when one of the two great One-samas walk through the school. Akeno Himejima was about the average height of the girls her age. She had deep black hair, done up into a long ponytail that almost reached down to her feet. She had a marvelously curvaceous figure, perfect mile-long legs, wide hips and a thin waist that lead up to the largest pair of in the school. For some girls, they admired her just because she was still able to stand up straight with those things on her chest. She walked with an amazing grace and poise that not many would find in this day and age. Her hair and ponytail was so elegant that many of her fans called it the last great ponytail of the 21st century. And when the masses looked to her, she held her hand to her mouth and gave a stunning smile with ara. She was the dream girl for many members of the school. And an ideal older sister for others. She's a beautiful young lady, that's for sure, but why do I get the feeling there's more to her than meets the eye? Tsunade pondered out loud. You have a good eye, Senju-san. She's my best friend and she can be a bit of a sadist. Well, that explains it, no one's that pretty without having a quirk or two. Of course you'd say that, Granny. Next thing Naruto knew, he was being sent flying across the room. Asia and Ria's sweat dropped when they saw Naruto go flying across the room and get up like nothing happened. Issei looked at Naruto as if he was crazy. Let me finish reading, damn it. Naruto looked sheepish and scratched the back of his head. Sorry. She walked into her homeroom and acknowledged everyone who greeted her so intently. She walked to the back of the room and sat in her chair. She started to organize her desk when she noticed another form walk into her space. You appear to be as popular as ever, Akeno-san. The busty girl looked up from her desk to see her fellow classmate standing by her side. The girl was a slim beauty with short black hair and captivating purple eyes hidden behind her red glasses. She had her arm under her modest chest and was fixing her glasses. It sounded Kaichu. Kaichu? We love you. Ara, looks like you're still quite the popular girl yourself, Kaichu. Akeno said with a laugh as she covered her mouth and smiled. If everyone was looking at them at the moment, then it was best they kept up the appearance that they were only familiar with each other. What can I do for you today, Kaichu? I just wanted to inquire how Rias was doing. Sauna leaned against the desk to relax herself. I heard that the reception date has already been set for sometime next month. How did she take that? Issei stopped reading in horror and said reception date and no way. I refuse to accept that Butchu is getting married. What about my flags? Asia misunderstood the situation and was elated. You're getting married, Butchu. Congratulations, I'm so happy for you. Unfortunately, Asia, I am trying to avoid this marriage as much as possible. I don't like the idea of having my future chosen for me. Naruto couldn't help but overhear the issue and wondered if she was being forced into this. Akeno's face actually stiffened for a moment at the mention of a certain reception that has been set in her personal future. She closed her eyes before she regained her perfect composure. Ara, Kaichou, you should know better than to underestimate Butchu like that. She has far too many responsibilities to worry about than a silly date. Sauna noticed for a second the uncomfortable expression on the Himejima woman's face before she ignored it and smiled. I suppose you're right. Rias was always more of a in the now kind of girl. She wanted to continue her talk but was interrupted by the commotion around them. Hey. Did you guys hear? What? Apparently that guy came to school today. What? Seriously? Why does he even bother? Nobody wants him here anyway. He probably thinks nobody will keep calling him loser if he tries and prove himself at school. Too late for that. He's a failure at everything he does anyway. I suppose failure is one of the best ninja in our world. Like hell these idiots know what they're saying. Tsunade stated with irritation. Sauna and Akeno listened in as their classmates talked about one of the third years in their school. Someone who transferred in last year into their second term. And someone who never came to school, never came to his classes, didn't go to any clubs or have any friends. He was just as bad as the so-called pervert trio of the second years. The loser of Kuo Academy. I was dead last in the Ninja Academy, look at me no. Who cares what they think, ain't nothing gonna stop me from pushing forward. Naruto loudly declared, easing the worries of Tsunade. Rias, Issei, and Asia couldn't help but smile at the brash blonde. There was something about him that let you relax around him. Devil. Everyone in the hallway was looking at the woman as she walked down the hall with her mind on other subjects. She had a voluptuous body with perfect hergless figure and a large bust that caught the eye of most hormonal teenagers. Her turquoise eyes were like magnificent gems that captured the soul of many feeble hearts. But above everything else, her beautiful flowing crimson hair covered her back like a curtain of silk. Rias Gremory. The most beautiful girl in Kuo Academy. The most popular idol in the school. And the other half of the two great one-Samas. The stunning foreigner in charge of the occult research club that spoke so fluently that you almost couldn't believe she hadn't spent her whole life in Japan. Oh it looks I'm next. Rias knew she was beautiful, but the way the book described her eyes made her seemingly blush lightly. I'll say. You look better here than what the TV shows. Naruto said nonchalantly, making Issei sputter all of a sudden. He felt his harem way was being challenged. Rias only smiled and said thanks. Despite most of the students in the hallway putting their full attention on the crimson-haired girl, she paid no mind to their stares. She was preoccupied with thinking about all the strange events and signs she was receiving over the last few weeks. Magical readings of possible holy elements in the town vicinity were putting her on edge. Not to mention that Ani-sama and Otu-sama had set a date to her to meet a certain vain immortal devil. She sighed and shook her head. She was not in the mood for a whole school day of work. Except with her eyes covered and her unfocused senses, she didn't see a taller, larger figure come around the corner. They walked into each other and the crimson beauty fell back on her butt. The moment she fell over, the entire hallway went silent in shock and anger. Rias moaned a little and rubbed her back. Sorry. A larger calloused hand lowered down to help her up. Rias looked past the hand and up at the man it belonged to. He was taller than her, at least by several inches. He was wearing the Kuo Academy uniform with a light orange shirt underneath a black jacket. His clothes were wrinkly and disheveled, probably from not being properly attended to by the blonde man. And his shaggy blonde hair had pushed his bangs over his eyes to keep them out of sight from the redhead, but left the strange marks on his face free for her to see. I can't help but think you aren't taking care of yourself, Naruto. Tsunade growled out when she saw the state of Naruto in the book. That's me, but isn't me, Naruto defended himself as readily as possible, but withered when Tsunade gave him that look. Rias and Asia couldn't help but stare as Tsunade cowed Naruto and looked in awe at how she did such a thing. Rias couldn't help but ask with sparkles in her eyes, can you teach me how to do that? Tsunade looked at the young girl and smirked. Yeah, I can teach you how to calm idiots like him down. All they could hear was Naruto yelling indiscriminate gibberish when he realized another Tsunade was soon to appear. After a moment of silence to look over the blonde man, she realized she was still on the floor. She reached out to take his hand. Get out of here you bastard. Some of Ria's fans kicked the blonde away and guarded their idol from his advances. Don't you dare touch Gremory Onasama with your filthy hands. Were you trying to steal something from her? Don't try to get Ria's Onasama dirty, you Yankee. Rias was surrounded by both young boys and girls from the school that thought they needed to protect her from the supposed delinquent. She heard rumors about Naruto Uzumaki, a classmate in her year that came from overseas with bleached hair and a rough accent. She heard that he had ties to the underbelly of society, rarely ever came to school, and always looked like he was ready to steal and become a charity case. Which was why most of the school tried to stay away from him. Tsunade couldn't help but get angry at the way these rabid fans were treating Naruto. If she had the chance they would all be smashed into the ground. Meanwhile Rias couldn't help but feel embarrassed because her supposed fans were putting blame onto Naruto when it was her fault that they collided. As Naruto was pushed away by the large barrier of students, his eyes briefly met with Rias. Just for an instant, just long enough for only Rias to fully see them. And everyone was wrong. His eyes didn't convey any form of deceit. They didn't show any anger or fear, no sadness or trickery. They were empty. He wasn't trying to keep up appearances or look good in front of other people. He simply didn't care who said what about him. He was just there. Rias watched him walk away, ignoring the sounds of the other students telling him to leave the third-year beauty alone. And she watched him walk away without even getting to say sorry to him. It's like you're a different person Uzumaki-san. Said a saddened Asia when she saw the look the Naruto in the book had. Just call me Naruto, no need for the formality crap. Seeing myself brood like that reminds me of the time Pervy Sage passed away. But if I know myself I'll get back up and keep moving forward. Naruto subconsciously slid a hand over his stomach and heard a small snort through his mind and smiled. And Naruto-san thank you. Asia couldn't help but smile seeing how determined he looked. She hoped he would be friends with her and the others. Devil, what the fuck do you mean you've got a girlfriend? One bald boy and one bespectacled boy screamed out in absolute dread as their stone-faced expression were aimed towards their mutual best friend. Note to self, hit the blasphemous doubt out of Motohama and Mitsuda later. I so can get a girlfriend. Issei muttered to himself. Everyone's sweat dropped at the sheer intensity of that threat. Issei currently had the biggest, most smug shit-eating grin on his face as he could muster. He rubbed his chin and chuckled haughtily, ahahaha, come now Motohama-kun, Mitsuda-kun, don't be so crass. We are in the presence of a young lady right now, you two must control your language. He did an over-the-top turn and bowed respectfully to the young Bishoujo besides him. I'm sorry about that, Yuma-chan, they usually aren't so rude. His new girlfriend shined a pretty smile at her new boyfriend. It's okay Haidu-kun, I'm just happy that you want your friends to meet me already. She turned to the other two perverts and bowed to them. It's a pleasure to meet you too. I hope we can get along very well in the future. Issei bid Yuma goodbye as she had to get going back to her own school. After she was out of sight, Issei turned back to his two friends that were still pale and frozen. He walked between them and made an even bigger smile. Life is good boys. Life is good. Yeah, until it turns out she was just a liar and using me. Said Issei bitterly at the memory of Yuma. Naruto saw the look Issei was making and wondered what happened. I'm not sure what happened between you and this Yuma chick Issei, but look at it this way. Whatever happened is in the past, but you can learn from it and ensure that the mistakes made won't happen again. On top of that you're not alone. You have Rias and Asia right. Naruto stated. Issei felt a smile growing on his face and said, yeah, I'm not alone anymore. As he looked towards Asia and Rias. Devil. Rias was sitting in her dimly lit clubroom at her desk with her hand playing with a red chess piece. She was looking over some reports and papers that needed her immediate attention. A hot cup of fresh tea was placed by her hand. Here you go Butchu. Her dearest friend stood by her side after making one of her delicious cups of soothing tea for her leader. Thank you Akeno. Akeno just smiled and politely bowed her head as Rias took a sip from her cup. The black-haired girl looked around the empty room. It's quite calm when we don't have any activities for the club to do, don't you think? Yes, well there isn't any work for us to do until tonight. And Koneko and Yudo still have class work to worry about, so we can't expect this room to always be so lively. Rias noted with a sly smile, rolling the pawn piece in her hand. Akeno saw what Rias was doing with the red piece. But you, why do you have another spare piece? A spare piece? I wonder how I got my hands on it. Thought Rias as she looked at the item. Naruto and Tsunade looked at the weird object in interest, but said nothing hoping it would be explained. Rias finally took note of what she was playing with and looked down at her hand. Oh, this. It's supposed to be a little wedding gift Ani-sama gave to me before we started setting the work for the wedding. I've had it for a while now and I have nothing to use it for. She placed it on the table and spun it under her finger. Oh, a wedding gift. Akeno tried to sound excited but saw that Rias had a comically miffed pout on the sore subject matter. Well, that was very nice of Surzich's-sama. Rias just raised one eyebrow patronizingly, right, nice. Devil, Ani-sama. Stop. I want you to face me now. Rias demanded from her older brother as they walked through the west wing of the castle. The taller caped figure stopped his walk and turned to his younger sister. Ah, Rias, I didn't notice you were following me. I've been yelling at you for 5 minutes. What can I do for you today? Rias began to rub her temples as she was beginning to get a headache. He's not even here and he's stressing me out. Rias shuddered at the thought of her brother appearing. Tsunade could only look at Rias with sympathy as she realized she has a lot of her own troubles of dealing with idiots. He's one of those, isn't he? Rias nodded and uttered, unfortunately he might be worse than what you're thinking of. Rias stopped and took a calming breath before she started her tirade against her brother. I wanted to get a straight answer from you as to why I have to marry into the Phoenix family. Why is there a need for me to be engaged to Riser Phoenix, of all people? Her older brother just smiled and motioned with his hands for her to calm down. Ma, don't worry. It's just one of those political or celebrity weddings, you know, just for show. Rias wasn't satisfied with that answer as a tick mark grew on her head. I understand that we need to keep up appearances with the showing of a pure-blooded wedding. What I don't understand is why I need to give up my future to such a megalomaniacal, egotistical braggart like him. Surzich's didn't know what to say with all those increasingly harsh words used to appropriately explain the Phoenix son. What about the Gremory family? Didn't we already go through all the worry with father about me being appointed as the next heir? What's the Phoenix family and why are you being forced to marry him? Asked Naruto. Based on the description of this Riser Phoenix, he sounded like an arrogant jackass. He didn't like that one of his new friends was going through something like this. Yeah, but he sounds like a jackass. Issei chimed in. Rias could only smile at the support she got from Naruto and Issei. The Phoenix family themselves aren't that bad, like the Gremory, they're one of the last pure-blooded families. And apparently before I was born my father and brother made a contract with the Phoenix family, stating that the heirs would marry. It sounds to me like they only care about political image and power. Typical clan affair garbage. Tsunade stated coldly. Rias nodded in agreement and stated, it's why I'm trying to get out of this marriage. I don't want my future taken from me. I want the ability to choose who I marry and possibly fall in love with. You don't have to worry about things like that, Rias. If it really comes down to it, Milikas will have to take up the throne when he comes of age. Surzich's turned back around and started heading back to his quarters. Besides, this is all just a formality that we should be able to figure out soon enough. Ani-sama, patch. Rias caught the item her brother threw over his shoulder and looked down at it. A white pawn piece that started to glow red in her hands. One of their evil pieces. What is this? An extra pawn piece Ajuka gave to me to hand over to someone I believe deserved it. Just think of it kind of like a gift from the Satans as a thank you for going along with this. He turned back to his sister and clapped his hands together in a begging form. I'm sorry Rias, I really have to go now. Wait. Ani-sama. I don't need another piece for. Don't think of it like I'm pitying you like that, Rias. Surzich's just gave his dear little sister a calming smile. I think that no matter what happens, I'll always believe you will know the right thing to do. And I'm putting my faith in that you'll take in a wonderful family. Rias stayed quiet after her brother had said that and just looked down at the chess piece and thought. Surzich's ran back and stopped when he skidded across the floor and turned around on one foot. Oh. Almost forgot, Seraphil sends her regards as well. She wanted me to tell you, cha. Congrats, Rias-chan. If that meanie does anything to hurt you, tell me and I'll kick his butt tomorrow. Surzich's finished the message with Seraphil's signature pose and his tongue peeking out of his lips. Oh god. Ow. My eyes. Yelled Issei the moment he saw a grown man try and act like a magical girl. Even when he isn't here, he still manages to disappoint me. Said Rias with a flat look that basically said she was done with this. Asia didn't understand what was happening. Naruto and Tsunade were able to shrug it off, as nothing would ever defeat Lee and Guy's sunset hug. Asia thankfully wasn't looking and was looking at Issei in concern when he yelled out. Rias just had a blank flat look on her face and shook her head in disappointment. I'm leaving now. She left the hall, leaving Surzich's standing there in that awkward pose, looking like an idiot. The young boy saw his father frozen in place like that and walked over to him. Otu-sama. What are you doing? Failing son. I'm failing. Devil. Rias looked at the pawn piece and flicked it over with her finger with a confident smile. Well, it doesn't matter what happens in the future. Let's just worry about what we've got to do today. She stood back up and started to undress herself. I'm gonna take a quick shower, then we can send out our familiars. Hahaha. Issei began to giggle and had a perverted grin only for his vision to suddenly go black. It wasn't any better for Naruto either as he was getting a heated look from Tsunade, so he promptly put his hands over his face. "Hey, who turned out the lights?" yelled a surprised Issei, only to feel someone's hands on his face. It was Asia. The girl pouted at the thought of Issei looking at Rias like that and not her. Rias laughed at the situation and took the book from Issei and began to read. Akeno just smiled sweetly as Rias stripped down to her nethers. "Yufufu, do you want me to set out a clean set of clothes for you?" "Thank you." Rias threw away her underwear and started dashing to the shower. Akeno just couldn't help but giggle at her best friend's excitable behavior. Even with her respectable, well-mannered behavior, she couldn't help but act like a kid when she was excited for something again. And again, they were both kind of like that sometimes. Devil. The day was the best day of Issei's entire brief ladyless life. In just one date with his new girlfriend, he had effectively ended a 17-year relationship with his right hand. And despite the good times, it would not be one he missed. "Easy there, lover boy, it ain't that easy to get in a lady's pants," said Tsunade as she realized Asia still had her hands over Issei's face. Issei began to grumble about how life wasn't fair and he only wanted to appreciate the female form. Uma-chan was, in no uncertain terms, the perfect girl for him. She was as beautiful as a goddess, yet didn't let her looks become a vanity. She was kind and sweet, listening to what he said and letting him listen when she had something to say as well. Her smile was like a ray of bright light that shined down on all his dark tendencies and made him feel safe. Her clothes were simple but suited her sweet exterior she showed on their date, a little scrunchie on her wrist that Issei gave to her as a gift. She was perfect. "I can already tell I won't like her," stated Naruto as he looked at Yuma with narrowed eyes. There had to be a catch, no one was perfect. Issei only stayed silent at the mention of Yuma and clenched his fist. Asia saw this and gave Issei a hug which he was thankful for. The two teenagers were now at the fountain in the local park, the final stop for their first date. Yuma turned on her feet and looked to her new boyfriend with a bright red flush across her face. Issei-kun." The spiky, brown-haired boy perked up when she said his name. "Yes, Yuma-chan." She poked her fingers together and looked away in embarrassment. "Listen, we've finally been on a date and I really enjoyed it, so I was wondering if you could do a little favor for me." Issei did his best to contain his excitement but couldn't help but smile. "What is it?" "I'll do whatever I have to help you." Yuma put her hands together, tilted her head and smiled as happily as she could. "Will you die for me?" "Yep. Seem like a total bitch to me," said Tsunade as even she felt for Issei. No one deserved to be put through a situation like that. Rias only gripped the book and stated, "It's a good thing she's dead." Issei cleaned his ears out with his pinky, must have gotten too excited and heard her wrong. "Excuse me? I think I heard you wrong." I said. Two massive black crow wings, dark as the night that surrounded them, unfolded from her back. "Will you die for me?" The wings on her back flapped and she was raised off the ground, the smile on her face turning cold and meaningless as her face seemed to change from the soft every girl expression to a leaner form. "Wings? I'm assuming this is normal in your world, Rias?" asked an intrigued Naruto. Rias responded by saying, "By the end of this chapter, I'll try and explain everything I can." Naruto nodded and understood everything wasn't as normal as it seemed. "Why Yuma-chan?" Issei instinctively stepped back from the winged girl as a shining weapon formed in her hand out of nowhere. She smiled and held the weapon over her shoulder. "Bye." She threw the spear of light as hard as she could as it rocketed towards the unsuspecting boy. He froze in horror as it soared towards his chest and planned to pierce him. Until a figure jumped from the street and tackled Issei to the ground, evading the spear of light by a tiny margin. Yuma raised an eyebrow in displeasure and looked to where her target had been thrown to. Issei was sprawled out on the ground, dizzy from the sudden whiplash, while the taller blonde figure standing beside him was rubbing the stiff out of his neck. The whiskered man with the white cloth on his shoulder groaned, "Shit. Haven't moved like that in a while. Probably not a good idea to dodge attacks like that without stretching out first." "Naruto, why you'll just go down with me?" Issei asked in disbelief. "Different version of me or not, if I see someone in trouble I'll always help out," responded Naruto as he pat Issei on the back with a megawatt smile. "Besides, unless something happened to this me, I should be fine," Naruto said with confidence. "I feel like you just jinxed yourself, Naruto." Tsunade deadpanned. Yuma narrowed her eyes and slowly floated back down to the ground. She stood still and glared at the blonde in front of her that finally looked in her direction. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Before Naruto could even open his mouth, Issei jumped up to his feet and pointed at Naruto in confusion. "Hey. You're that delinquent from my school, aren't you?" Naruto looked back to Issei with a bored expression and raised one visible eyebrow. "Do you know me? You're Naruto Uzumaki-senpai from Kuo Academy, right? The delinquent everybody tries to stay away from, the Yankee guy who barely ever comes to school," Issei yelled out as he was completely befuddled from the situation around him. "There's a chick with wings and you're focused on that?" Naruto deadpanned at Issei, who looked back at the TV sheepishly. Naruto just blinked. "Yeah, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. And am I supposed to know who you are?" Issei just blinked confusingly. "Huh?" He pointed at himself. I'm the pervert, Issei. The lump of libido. The pure incarnation of lust. You know, one of the perverted trio. Never heard of you. The guys who always have depraved thoughts in their heads. We always cut holes in the walls of the girls' changing rooms and spy at the girls as they change their clothes. The ones who would trade their souls at the drop of a hat for the chance to grope some soft oppai. Naruto just looked at Issei with a flat face, my respect for you just dropped. I think you might be even worse than pervy sage, and that man was a self-proclaimed super pervert. Tsunade had a glint in her eye and asked, I wonder if he can take a beating like that pervert. Issei felt his blood run cold and tried to speak, and now let's calm down here. I haven't done anything yet. I can't tell if you're saying that in shame or pride. Naruto deadpanned as Issei tried to explain his gimmick. I'm your underclassman, whoa, that can fucking wait. What the hell are you even doing here? Naruto grabbed the white apron on his shoulder and opened it up, revealing a cartoon drawing of a bowl of ramen with hands and little black eyes. I just came back from my shift and I was heading home. He turned around and looked to the girl with the massive wingspan, and on my way, I see some girl about to make some brat into a shish kebab. I'm not some brat. I'm 17. Issei said in his defense. I'm 1 year younger than you. Huh. So this version of me is a bit older. That means other me has been in this world for over a year. Thought Naruto as he begun to realize the implications of that. With the way other him has been acting, it was probably safe to assume he couldn't contact Kurama. Kurama would never let him brood like Sasuke. Uma glared at the two men, not sensing any power or special aura coming from either of them. Yet she was distracted with thinking how the blonde was able to jump out of the way of her attack and still take Issei with him. You shouldn't have interfered, boy. This was just a private matter I have with Issei-kun. But since you've interfered, I guess you'll just have to be a part of it now. Naruto's eyes furrowed as Issei looked at her in worry and tried to reason with her. Why Uma-chan, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Uma looked at the second-year student and smiled at him. Oh Issei-kun, there is no Uma-chan. That's just a lie, I told you to get close to you. She laughed into her hand. Did you really think any girl would want to go out on a date with you, a dirty little weasel? How silly of you. That's not true. Yelled a rarely angered Asia, surprising everyone in the room. Issei smiled and pat her head and said, thanks Asia, that really means a lot. Rias looked at the two members of her peerage and hoped she could have the same kind of bond as Issei and Asia. Little did she know a blonde knuckle-headed ninja would grant that wish. Issei's face fell into hopelessness as his heart became heavy. Naruto nudged him back. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but I don't think we should stick around to find out. Issei tried to empathize with the girl. There has to be something wrong with her. She wouldn't say things like that. What about the bird wings on her back, kid? I don't think this is a situation where we try to. Naruto stopped speaking when he saw Yuma's smiling face directly behind Issei's dreaded expression. He panicked and tried to make space before he felt an unbelievably hot sensation burn his chest and heart. A spear of pure light had been shoved through Issei's back and pierced through Naruto's chest, leaving them both frozen in disbelief as the burning pain settled in their centers. The light weapon evaporated and two huge gaping bloody holes were made through their bodies. Issei fell backwards, landing on the gravel and making a huge splash of crimson blood around him. Naruto fell to his knees, grasping the empty hole in his chest and vomiting massive globs of blood, coating his legs and the ground with his vital life. His vision blurred and he reached out to the smiling woman, trying to grab her even though she was at least a foot away from reach. His motor skills failed and Naruto fell sideways into a huge pool of crimson. Naruto! Tsunade yelled in horror when she saw the other version of the blonde with a spear through his chest. Naruto could only look at his other self. He subconsciously moved his hand onto his chest. Meanwhile Issei looked on in horror. Seeing this situation reminded him of when Asia was killed. He blamed himself and now another friend of his was going through the same thing, but before he could continue with those thoughts he heard, "It's not your fault, you know." Issei looked wide-eyed at the blonde boy and asked, how can you say that? If I didn't just stand there maybe I could." The next thing Issei knew was pain as he was being headbutted by Naruto. Oh wow, what the hell, man. Like I said, it's not your fault, so get those thoughts out of your head. Other me knew the consequences and he still went in to try and help you anyways. After saying those words to Issei, Naruto looked towards Tsunade and said, "Granny, you know me, I've gotten out of worse situations, so have some faith." As Naruto said this, Rias could only look on and see how the blonde had a way with words that made you want to believe in him. He may be a bit brash and a bit of a knucklehead, but I would love to have someone like him in my peerage. Rias thought to herself. Tsunade grew a tick mark and yelled, "Have some faith. How many times have I had to heal you because you were always so damn reckless?" Naruto could only sputter as he kept getting berated by his mother figure. Rias, Issei and Asia couldn't help but laugh at the scene of a young man trying to sink into his couch cushion. After everyone calmed down, Rias continued the story. Both of them were bleeding out, Issei and Naruto in shock as the agonizing pain faded and their whole bodies went numb and cold. Issei raised his blood-soaked hand as it trembled in front of his face, drops of his blood falling all over his face. Past the hand, he could see that Yuma walked over and stood over the bleeding-out boy with a sickeningly sweet smile still on her face. "Sorry Issei-kun, but I had to do this. Don't blame me, blame the one that gave you such a dangerous skill." She looks back up and pouted at the blonde who was heavily panting as his eyes shook in his head, "But you can blame yourself for trying to play the hero part when you had no chance." Naruto just raised a shaky hand at her before coughing up more blood and falling back on the pebbles beneath him. She looked back down to Issei, knelt down by his frightened head and smiled. "It was fun. Thanks for taking me out on that date Issei-kun." She kissed her fingers and tapped his tear-covered cheeks as he tried to wheeze out a plea. She started to float again and waved at her dying ex-boyfriend, "Bye." She disappeared from sight, leaving the two men to bleed out as the light faded from their eyes. Naruto couldn't help but curse what had happened. He said he didn't want to be a part of anything like this again, but the moment it arrives, he has to try and help people. But now he was dying, and this time there was no help from anyone else to make sure he makes it out of this alive. "I told ya," was all everyone heard before Naruto got a smack to head. Issei was silently crying, feeling the contrast of his body going cold as he was bathing in the warmth of his own blood. He didn't want this to happen. He didn't want to die yet. He was still a virgin, damn it. There had to be some rule against this kind of shit. Aha. Another one. Someone has his priorities straight. A voice that sounded eerily familiar to the two ninja was heard before it slowly faded. Naruto looked at Tsunade with a look of disbelief and asked, "Was that who I think it was, Granny?" "I don't know and I'd rather not find out." Rias and Asia could only deadpan at the voice supporting the perverted pawn. As the two men started to fade out, a bright red light started to shine from a blood-covered paper beside Issei's pants. A massive circle with dozens of symbols inside of it was projected from the soaked piece of parchment, and the men were bathed in a warm red glow. A female figure formed above the red circle, and she looked down at the dying men below her. "I guess you were the one who called me. And it looks like I came just in time to clean up the mess." She looked down at the brown-haired boy as the light finally disappeared from his eyes, and his head went slack. She looked up a little towards the blonde whose face was covered in his own blood, yet still found enough strength left to look into her eyes. They stared for a moment before his eyes went hazy and slowly closed shut. They were dead. Both of them. Finally gone from this world. She just closed her eyes and smiled, "Well, it looks like I've found two little strays on their way home. Well, don't worry boys, I'll see you soon." Two large crooked black wings sprouted out of her lower back and her hands started to glow the same kind of red as her hair. "I think it's about time we introduce ourselves officially," said Tsunade as she looked at Rias and her friends. Rias nodded in agreement and began once more, "I am Rias Gremory, a devil, heir to the house of Gremory and sister to Surzich's Lucifer, one of the four great satans of the underworld. Issei and Asia are a part of my peerage, Issei is my pawn, and Asia is my bishop. Unfortunately the other members of my peerage aren't here at the moment. Well, it's nice to meet you Rias. My name is Naruto Uzumaki and I'm a genin of the village hidden in the leaves. This here is Granny Tsunade, the fifth Hokage of the place we're from, and if you couldn't tell we're ninja." Tsunade grabbed Naruto's shoulder and squeezed. All Naruto could feel after that was pain after hearing a whisper, "You're so lucky we're trapped in this place, cause if this happened anywhere else you would be doing D ranks for weeks brat." Ignoring the threat, Naruto had to ask, "So what does it mean to be in a peerage?" "I'm not sure if you know the game chess, but it consists of 16 board pieces. It has 8 pawns, 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a single queen, and finally the king, which is what I am. It's also used to turn other people into reincarnated devils as our servants," Rias explained. Thankfully Rias didn't get the expected reaction of being essentially turned into a slave because Naruto looked into her eyes and realized, devil or not, she really didn't seem to be that bad. Meanwhile Tsunade looked at Rias and her friends and had a small smile knowing she was probably different from other devils. "But the way Issei and Asia act, I can probably assume you don't treat them like typical slaves, do you?" asked a curious Naruto once he got a better understanding. Rias nodded her head and said, "In my family, we usually treat our peerages as extended family of the Gremory and care for them like our own." Naruto only nodded and said, "Well Rias, I wish your other self some luck because knowing me you're gonna have one hell of a time trying to get me to listen." Tsunade laughed along. "Good luck getting the brat to listen, he may not like authority figures too much, but once he's on your side he'll stick by you through thick and thin." Rias only nodded and thought maybe some things could be arranged to have Naruto visit Kuo and she to the Hidden Leaf and vice versa. "Well, I think we're reaching the end of the first chapter, let's see how this ends." Rias spoke up and began to read. Devil. When Naruto slowly opened his eyes again, there was a bright white light and a blank space set out before him. Well, this was probably what was left for those that finally crossed the other side. It wasn't a burning pit of fire and there weren't any monsters or demons mutilating him, this probably wasn't hell. But there weren't any clouds, and he wasn't being greeted with a million-mile-long all-you-can-eat ramen extravaganza. This wasn't Nirvana. After a moment the fatigue finally started to fade from his eyes, and everything became clear. He was staring up at a fluorescent light and a beige tile ceiling. Naruto just blinked slowly. Well, that's disappointing. Do you have ramen for brains or something? Issei asked in pure disbelief. Naruto only shrugged and smiled. Oh yeah, he'd love having a ramen dream like that. He pushed himself up and saw that he was on one of those white beds in what looked like an infirmary. He was alone in the room because all that he could see was a spare set of clothes set out on the table beside him. He slowly lowered his hand to where he thought he had been stabbed, feeling his normal chest, and his heart beat steadily. He rubbed his face and sighed. Was all that just a dream? He put his hand back on the bed and was greeted with a soft sensation and a warm feeling covering his hand. Naruto slowly turned his head to look down at the girl that had softly moaned when his hand touched her breast while she was quietly napping. Her soft face was taking in light breaths while her long red hair covered her body like a blanket, and she might have been naked. Naruto lifted up the bed sheet they seemed to have been sharing. Yep, she was naked. And so was he. Naruto looked at Rias with a slight blush on his face and asked, why are we in a bed together naked? Are you a pervert? Rias coughed out, and no. I sleep naked because I don't like the feeling of clothes when I'm in bed. Realizing she said more than she intended, Rias blushed and quickly tried to shift the conversation. I imagine I'm only there because I healed Issei first and I got tired after healing your injuries. While this was happening, Tsunade looked at Asia trying to calm Issei down, who was freaking out how a blonde bastard was sharing a bed with his butchu and smirked. Seeing as how chaos was spreading, Tsunade gently took the book from Rias and continued. Naruto didn't know if this was a dream, real life or the afterlife, but this had never happened before. So Naruto pulled himself out of the bed and started to dress himself in the new clothes that had been set out at the side. He grabbed the black boxers and blue jeans to cover his bare privates. Your other pair was soaked in blood and had a hole through it, so I had to get you a new outfit. I hope you don't mind. Naruto pulled the unbuttoned shirt over his toned frame and looked over his shoulder to the girl in the bed that had finally woken up. Naruto started to button up the new shirt. It's fine. These look like better clothes anyway. He stayed silent for a moment before asking a question that was on his mind for the last few moments. Did we do anything? Ria smiled and giggled, shaking her head negatively. No. We didn't do anything like that. She sat up, exposing her large for him to see if he just took a second look back. Why? Are you disappointed? Relieved actually. If I did actually do something like that, I would at least like to remember what it was like. Naruto finished buttoning the shirt and straightened it out. What happened exactly? Well, it's clear to me that other Naruto has achieved mental maturity a lot quicker than this knucklehead here. Hearing himself being slandered, Naruto looked at Tsunade and said, yeah, whatever, granny. Only to shortly have the book thrown in his face. After recovering from the assault, Naruto himself began to read. I was summoned after you and the other boy had been stabbed by that woman. He nodded his head. What happened to that kid? I healed his wound and dropped him off in his room back at his house. Ria stretched out her stiff body before pulling the sheet up to cover his naked chest, out of courtesy for the man that looked like he was waiting for her to cover up before facing her. I couldn't find your address in the school registry, so I just brought you to the infirmary and the academy. Naruto just nodded his head and stood up. And you're naked, why exactly? Ria's just looked down at her current clothing situation, because I can heal other people better when I have closer contact to their bodies. After I healed Haidu-kun's injuries, I came back over here to heal yours. And after I was done, I was so tired that I had to take a quick nap. It's a little fault of mine, but I find it more comfortable to sleep naked than to wear anything else when you sleep. Finally regaining composure, Rias let out a small laugh, knowing even when she was flustered she was right. Naruto stopped getting dressed, fully clothed in a new set of jeans and a white polo shirt. He turned towards the bed and leaned against the wall of the infirmary. He stared at the redhead. Rias Gremory-san, right? Yes, Naruto Uzumaki-san. Do you mind if I call you Naruto? Naruto just shrugged his shoulders indifferently. That didn't matter right now. Who exactly are you? I'm Rias Gremory. She threw her legs off the side of the bed and crossed them comfortably, two large black bat wings unfolding from her back, and I'm a devil. Naruto's eyes actually widened before he smiled in a condescending manner. Devil? Really? I've seen a lot of stuff before, but I draw the line at devil. You're a devil now too. The disbelief in Naruto's eyes suddenly faded when he realized she really wasn't joking. What do you mean? I couldn't bring you back to life as a human, so I brought you back as a devil. You should be lucky I had a spare piece to give you after I brought back Haidu-kun. He took almost every other one I had. Rias informed the blonde, silently thanking her stupid Oni-sama for giving her that little gift. She pointed at his chest. As of now, you're a servant to the house of Gremory. Naruto placed his hand against his chest, looking down at it in thought. Can you take it back? Unfortunately no, if I tried to take the piece back you'd most likely die again. said Rias as she still wondered about that special piece. Naruto only nodded in understanding and said, well, I don't think I'd like being turned into a servant, I can appreciate it when someone saves my life. Rias shook her head, I'm sorry. Even if I could, if I tried to do that then you would most likely die again. Servitude or death. Well, that just sucks. Naruto huffed as he looked up at the lights over his head, spreading the hair out of his eyes. Rias tilted her head, I promise it won't be as bad as you think. If you give it a chance I'm sure you would find something to keep you here. Naruto closed his eyes, I'm sorry Grimmery-san, but it's because I'm here that I won't have anything to care about again. Naruto walked over to the door and opened it up, I won't abandon you. Me and my group won't leave you alone at school. Then I guess I don't need to go to school anymore. Whatever, I'm pretty sure I can learn what I need on the streets. He joked with a little smile as he prepared to walk out. Before he stopped and looked over at the redhead again, bowing his head slightly, thank you. Rias watched as Naruto left the infirmary and made his way out of the school. She sighed and got out of bed, placing her feet on the cold ground and standing naked in the empty room. She walked over to her neatly piled clothes and pulled her underwear up her legs. I won't let you go so easily Naruto. She said with a small smile and giggle, you're just too cute and interesting for my new pawn. She vowed to herself to bring Naruto to her side, whatever the methods. Tsunade asked Rias, you're a stubborn one aren't you? If there's something I really want I won't let it go without a fight. Tsunade only nodded and smirked at her. As Naruto was about to ask to continue on to the next chapter a sudden announcement rang throughout the room. It's time for a break. Stop reading. Naruto and the others heard the voice call out and stopped reading. Shortly after, the room began to expand and a table poofed into existence with food, snacks, and some drinks. Oh heck yeah ramen. Naruto yelled out the moment he saw food. Meanwhile Tsunade was eyeing the drinks until she found some sake. With a grin on her face Tsunade said to herself Shizune isn't here to stop me so don't mind if I do. Rias, Issei, and Asia shrugged their shoulders and joined in at the table. As the group began to eat, Naruto brought up the question of what kind of energy Rias and the people of her world use. So Rias, now that I'm looking, it seems you guys don't use chakra, so what do y'all use? Rias raised an eyebrow at the question and realized what Naruto said. To answer your question, we devils use magic and wait you said you use chakra right? Naruto nodded his head and wondered, you've heard of chakra? Rias began to explain how her world had multiple types of energy. The most common energy type we have is usually magic for us devils, the fallen angels and angels have holy-based magic, which is our weakness. There is also chakra which the yokai have. Hearing this Tsunade began to wonder what the difference between the humans of her world and what these yokai were if they both had chakra. She also wondered if it was possible to learn the yokai's techniques and vice versa. As she finished her thoughts and the conversation came to an end, a flash of light appeared. Out of the light appeared a young girl with white hair wearing a black cat hairpin and a Kuo uniform similar to Ria's. She had yellow eyes, and Naruto's eyes widened when he felt chakra coming from the young girl. The first thing Koneko felt was an overwhelming amount of chakra, with wide eyes she saw Rias, the pervert and the nun eating with two people she didn't know. The women had an absurd amount of chakra, but the young man, his presence was overwhelming, she didn't understand why the boy had so much chakra. Shortly after looking around she realized she was standing around. But you, where are we? Koneko. Rias jumped out of her chair and ran up to the young Nekashu and hugged her. Unfortunately for Koneko, Rias had her pressed up against her chest and all she felt was Issei was jealous of Koneko but didn't say a word for fear of Tsunade bashing his face into oblivion. Call it a pervert's intuition. Shortly after the hug Rias began explaining to Koneko the current situation they were in and how they have a chance to see the future. So you must be yokai, I don't see much of a difference between us. Stated Naruto as he looked down at Koneko. After getting free from Rias and listening to her explanation, Koneko looked up at Naruto and realized that even though his chakra was overwhelming there was something else with it. It felt incredibly warm and she had to ask, why is your chakra so warm now? All of a sudden Koneko felt so relaxed a set of ears and a tail popped out and just as quickly they disappeared. Never mind. Stated Naruto in surprise as he sensed nature chakra flowing into Koneko. Koneko sat down right next to Naruto just to stay near the comfortable feeling of his chakra. Rias in her shock just stared as she saw her cute rook relax around Naruto so quick it blew her mind. So she did the next best thing a lady of her stature should do, she pouted. Tsunade saw this and chuckled. Naruto has this kind of effect on people, especially censors. Before Rias could respond, all everyone heard was the excited yell of a certain pervert woo. It's Koneko-chan and she's a catgirl. I wanna pet her so bad and said catgirl glared at the pervert and began to crack her fist. Said pervert quickly shut up, hid behind the beloved nun, and said nun looked on in confusion. Seeing all this play out, Tsunade smiled and thought to herself, oh I like her already. Seeing as Koneko-chan is all caught up with the situation and we've finished eating, I think we should start chapter 2. said Naruto as he took the book and began to read. Naruto always knew he never really was much of a morning person. Sometimes he would have gotten up early for training, but if he had a choice between getting up or sleeping in, he would take sleeping in hands down. But now it seems like he wasn't interested in the idea of getting up during the morning or afternoon now either. Just standing in the light of the sun felt like he had 1-ton boulders hooked onto his arms, legs and eyelids. He was sluggish all the way to work, feeling like he was dragging his limbs around. And at work, Gramps said that he was acting more sluggish and scatterbrained than usual. I was like that too at first. It took some time to adjust. Chimed in Issei as he finished hiding behind Asia and sat back down. As devils we naturally prefer night over the day. You'll find yourself feeling more sluggish and unresponsive during the day because of our natural weakness to light. While during the night you'll find yourself more responsive. Lectured Rias as she suddenly had a pair of glasses on. Tsunade the ever-curious medic asked, do you actually need those glasses? Rias, realizing the embarrassment if she actually answered the question, diverted it by asking Naruto to keep reading. And now, for some odd reason, he felt like he had more energy while walking down the street to his apartment. He felt like he could run a few marathons and not even get winded. And everything was so bright that he couldn't tell the difference between whether something was under the moonlight or in the shadows of the buildings around him. He thought about all the different explanations for these sudden bursts in energy. Perhaps he just didn't get enough sleep last night and now that the sun was down he was feeling more awake. Or maybe someone slipped him something in his drink and now he's going through the side effects. Yet all his mind could think about was that pretty crimson-haired woman he found himself in bed with last night. And that no matter how much he tried to ignore it, the words she said to him last night had left an impression. You're a devil now too. Naruto sighed and tried to shake his head free of the bad thoughts. All he wanted to do right now was go home, lay on the crappy futon, and try to shut his eyes. Naruto passed a taller man in a black trench coat and fedora on the street. As the blonde man walked further past him, the tall man lifted his hand and a blue light started to form. Issei realized what was about to happen. Instead of him being targeted by Donaseek, he was gonna go after Naruto. He heard Naruto say earlier that he'd been through much worse situations than this. He'd be fine. He spun on his feet and threw the spear of light at the back of the retreating boy. The man saw the burning hot light pierce through the cloth of his target and there was no body. Issei let out a sigh he didn't know he had. Asia reached out for Issei and gave him a comforting pat on his back and smiled. He smiled back knowing she was trying to help him in her own way. The man watched as the white apron he had pierced started to burn into nothing but ash. He looked up from that spot to see the whiskered blonde man standing a meter away from the burning cloth after dodging his attack. Naruto looked down to see the spear of light evaporate into little particles, leaving a seared-through hole in the ground. He looked up at the strange man across from him. That's my second one in 2 days. I need to pay for those, you know. Well, don't worry about it, the older man said as a similar pair of large black feathery wings popped out of his back and stretched out to their fullest length. You won't need to worry about anything after I'm done with you, little devil. Naruto stepped back a little when he saw the man reveal his true nature. He looked the man over. "SOOO, what are you supposed to be anyway? Are you supposed to be a devil hunting other devils?" Rias couldn't hold in her laughter. "Did you just? I can't believe you said that." Asia looked at Naruto and wondered if they had any type of religion in his world. Koneko just asked, your chakra is extremely warm, but are you an idiot? Hey. I take offense to that. Naruto retorted and began to grumble about short chicks making fun of him. The tall man raised an eyebrow at his condescending tone and shook his head. "Oh, that's cute. He doesn't even know the preschool basics." He shook his head negatively. "No, I'm not a filthy devil like you." He said in a tone that wasn't venomous, but just like he was stating general knowledge, "I'm a fallen angel." Naruto raised an eyebrow at his title. "Okay, what exactly does that mean?" The large man just looked at him in confusion. And when he saw the completely serious look on the blonde's face, he realized that he really wasn't joking about this. "Oh. Okay. You really don't know. Wow, I must be dealing with a fresh out of the crib kind of brat here. No matter. Well, sorry for being from a different world." Naruto pouted and realized he did not like the creepy old dude. Tsunade gave Naruto a sympathetic look but motioned for him to continue. 2 large spears formed in his hands and he raised them over his head. "I'll just have to finish this quicker than I thought." He threw the spears of light at the blonde and watched as he dove out of the way from its strike zone. Naruto landed on the ground and looked up to watch as the fallen angel created more and more of his spears. The fallen angel sent his spears of light soaring at the young blonde man as he sprinted through the streets. Naruto still wasn't certain about how much damage these things could do if they even just scratched his skin, but since he didn't want to end up like he did yesterday, he opted to keep as far away from them as he could. Naruto continued to evade the attacks before one of them impacted against a fire hydrant in front of him. He jumped back and guarded himself as the metal protection measure exploded and covered the area in a spray of steam and water. Naruto should be moving faster than this. This shouldn't be an issue at all with Sakura. Tsunade thought to herself. Meanwhile Rias and her peerage were looking in curiosity. They remember hearing that Naruto was a ninja, but it looked like he was hampered somewhat, it didn't look like he was moving naturally. The large man smiled as he was certain that he had finally started to break the young man down. But in the large spray of water he saw a trash can being thrown at him with impeccable aim. He swiped upward and shattered the plastic container like it was nothing. But after he destroyed the can, all of the garbage contents inside of it scattered and pelted him in trash. He opened his eyes again, and they widened when he saw the drenched blonde appear in front of him. He furrowed his eyes intensely and planted a solid fist into the older man's face. "Fuck yeah," was what everyone heard from Issei. Koneko whispered nice punch. To Naruto, quietly hoping no one else heard her. Naruto only smiled in response. He stumbled back a bit and felt a drop of blood escape from his gums. He licked up the minuscule bit of blood and swallowed it before it escaped his lips. He smiled at the young man that now stood a foot away from him and looked down at the arm that punched him. He smiled at the blood dripping down it. "Well, it looks as if you didn't come out as unharmed as you would have liked to, huh?" Naruto looked down at the metal shrapnel that pierced his arms at different intervals. He kept the wound out of sight to try and ignore the settling pain in his limbs. He gave a cheeky grin and said in a playful tone, "Big talk from a guy with a banana peel on his head. You've always had this ability to rile people up, Naruto, no matter who you faced," said Tsunade as she began to reminisce. Well, Tsunade had that old person look. Rias and Koneko got curious and wondered what Naruto went through. The fallen angel's smile started to fade and he reached up for the peel on his fedora. He tossed it to the side and wiped his hand on his jacket with a laugh. He looked at the blonde. "Okay. You're more fun than I anticipated. I should let you know my name is Donasek." Naruto narrowed his eyes. "Okay. Does that mean you want to know my name too?" "That's not needed. See, I told you my name out of courtesy." He had a wicked grin grow on his face as spears of light formed in both hands and he gripped them tightly. "You should at least know the name of the last man you will ever see, don't you think?" "Somehow I doubt that," stated Tsunade with narrowed eyes. Sakura or not, she knew he wouldn't go down easily. Rias looked at the screen in disgust as she remembered Donasek and his teammate sneaking around her territory. Naruto snarled his teeth and lowered into a fighting stance. The fallen angel lifted his spear up too. The column of black and red energy covered the back of the spear and reduced it to nothing. Donasek and Naruto stared at it in surprise before they looked up towards the sound of approaching footsteps. A ball of the mysterious power illuminated the darkness and revealed to be in the palm of the oncoming person. "I'd like it if you refrained from attacking my new servant." The gorgeous young woman with the deep red hair appeared with a calm and collected smile on her lovely face. She dispersed the black power in her hand and placed it to rest on her hip. "I haven't even gotten the chance to break him in yet." After downing her sake, Tsunade asked Rias what kind of magic was that. "That's my family and the Bale family's power of destruction. It basically allows those of us who can use it to erase anything if we put enough power into it," replied Rias. Tsunade nodded in understanding and compared her ability to a bloodline limit. Donasek looked the young woman over before sighing and letting his light weapon dissipate in his hand. He fixed his fedora, "And here I thought he was just a little stray walking around at night. I never would have thought he was a part of the esteemed Gremory family." Rias smiled and tilted her head with a mischievous look. "He's new." Naruto narrowed his eyes and felt his brow twitch. She was giving them a cheeky smile and he had metal lodged in his arms. How was that fair? Donasek smiled and tilted his hat towards the young woman. "Well, I would hate to cause any more of a stir than what's already happened. So I shall take my leave for the day." But he turned around and sent a malicious grin towards the blonde man standing away from him. "I'd suggest you keep your new toys on a short leash. Who knows what might happen to him if he was walking home alone at night. We wouldn't want any unfortunate events to occur, do we?" Naruto took the threat he offered and gave a lopsided grin. "I'll keep that in mind in case I have to look over my shoulder." Donasek placed his fedora back on and he was shrouded in a blanket of feathers. He disappeared and black crow feathers floated down to the ground. Rias flicked her hair out of her face and walked over to the taller blonde. "I'm sorry about that. You left so quickly this morning that I forgot to tell you about others that might come after you. No matter what world you go to, you'll always be in a rush, won't you, Naruto?" said Tsunade with mirth in her voice as she looked at the blonde knucklehead. Naruto sheepishly rubbed the back of his head as he knew he tended to rush into things without planning all too often. "It would come in handy if you remember important stuff like that first." Naruto mumbled as he ran his hands through his hair to throw off the water droplets. "Yes, but it looks like you were able to hold firm even though a fallen angel stood in front of you." She finally walked up to him and tilted her head with a smile. "It must come with being the #1 delinquent of Kuo Academy, huh?" She giggled a little when she saw him sigh tiredly at her joke. Until she saw the injuries and blood seeping through the sleeves of his wet shirt. She gripped his arms and tried to look at them. "Looks like you got a few scratches. We should take care of that before they get infected." Naruto lifted his arms out of her hands. It's nothing. Rias looked at Naruto and said, if I know myself you won't have a choice. I do worry about my servants. Naruto smiled and said, I'm just being stubborn, I bet. Nonsense. Rias interrupted as she grabbed them roughly and used her destruction ability to degrade the metal shrapnel into nothing. Once the obscenities were gone, she deactivated the black energy and started using a low-level healing spell to help his arms. What kind of master would I be if I just left you alone in pain? Naruto stayed silent and just watched as she concentrated on his minor wounds. The light from her hands illuminated her face as he realized he was just staring at her. He looked off to the side. Thanks again. She looked up at him. For helping. I don't know what that guy's problem was, but if you hadn't jumped in, things would have gotten messier than they already were. What kind of king would I be if I couldn't even look after my own peerage? Rias stated, but as she said those words, she was reminded of her peerage's own issues and knew she needed to get started on helping them, and soon. Issei and Asia cheered for her while Koneko just stayed silent, but if you looked closely, a small smile could be seen. Rias just smiled and hummed in understanding, well, you'd be surprised how many times incidents like this happen if you don't take charge. I just had to make sure nothing happened to my two new pawns before I could officially bring you into our group. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her. Have you been spying on me the whole day? No. But I have a sense on you, and the moment that fallen angel arrived I thought something bad was going to happen. So I came running. She concentrated on the healing wounds again, finding you was a bit harder than I thought though. I couldn't summon you or appear at your side. Must be something wrong with your peace. Rias was lost in thought after that. So something was wrong with Naruto's peace, but she could at least sense him. After some deliberation, I may not be able to get to other you as quick as I'd like, but ultimately, I don't think it'd be too much of an issue. Especially once you start learning magic, you should be able to teleport yourself or defend yourself better until we arrive. It just means I'll have to show them who they're messing with, Uzumaki style. Naruto said with a confident smirk. Fallen angel. Naruto looked over to where the black-winged man once stood and felt an aversion to wanting to be anywhere near him again. What exactly does that mean? Rias stopped healing him for a moment and looked at him with a confident expression. If you'd like, I can explain everything to you. All you have to do is come to school tomorrow and stay after classes to come to our club. The whiskered blonde looked rather displeased with that condition. You can't be serious. Naruto shuddered at the thought of school. Meanwhile, Tsunade thought as she took another sip of sake, that's one way to get him information, but I doubt that'll be enough for him to attend. I am. She replied with a firm smile. In fact, I'm going to go visit Haidu-kun's house after this to tell him the same thing. What do you think? Naruto thought for a moment until he shook his head. No thank you. I want to know what's going on, but I'd rather not be sucked into this thing any more than I already am. Alright then, Rias reluctantly agreed with a solemn nod of her head. Before she looked up at him with a wry smile, then I think I'll just cash in all these favors you owe me for healing you these last 2 days. Naruto froze for a moment as his shaggy hair covered his eyes in a shadow. He mechanically turned his head towards the redhead. Why, you can't be. Or maybe I'll just follow you every day after work and keep bothering you until you say yes. She smiled at him innocently. How does that sound? Naruto knew then and there it was over for his other self. School would always be Naruto Uzumaki's worst enemy. I wish you the best, other me. Naruto felt a tick grow in his face as he pulled his arms out of her grasp. She seemed unhappy with that response and glared lightly at him. I wasn't done. This is enough. I can fix the rest of it by myself. Naruto gingerly rubbed his arms. I'd rather not put myself further in your pocket than I already have. She pouted up at him before sighing and shaking her head. Rias put her hands on her hips. SOOOO. Naruto stayed silent for a minute before lowering his head in defeat. I'll think about it. Rias nodded her head and started walking away. I'll see you tomorrow then. My vice president and I will be busy with other matters, so I'll send someone to pick you up. She disappeared in a flash of red light and Naruto was left alone in the street. He looked at the wounds that were close to closing up before he pulled them away. He just kept looking at them like he was expecting something, but nothing changed. He let out a heavy breath and looked very tired. It used to be a whole lot easier. Confused by this, Rias asked what Naruto meant by as he looked thoughtful. What do you mean? Do you have regeneration? Naruto thought about it for a moment before saying, Kinda, you see I'm in Uzumaki, so our chakra is far more potent than most. Because of that I usually heal pretty quickly from most wounds. Rias nodded in understanding. If his chakra is as potent as he says it is, well, it would explain why Koneko took a shining to him. Naruto thought about mentioning Kurama and being his Jinchuriki but decided against it. He wasn't ashamed of it, in fact he was proud of being Kurama's Jinchuriki. It just didn't feel like the right time to mention him yet. Unbeknownst to him, Koneko could smell a hint of fox on him. Devil. The entire room was quiet as all the students were nervous and jittery. Mostly because of the dark and heavy atmosphere revolving around the blonde delinquent that surprisingly came to class today. Although for the entire day he just had his face down in his desk and arms. Even the teachers gave up on trying to get him to pay attention during their classes. Hey, did Uzumaki seriously stay the whole day? 2 days. In a row. He actually came to class 2 days in a row. Has that ever happened before? Why is he doing it this time? Maybe it's an alibi. He's trying to establish somewhere everyone can see him so he can't be accused for a crime he committed. I say deadpan, these guys seriously have nothing better to do. Naruto nodded in agreement. Yeah, but they're all just normal people in the end, who cares? Seriously? Did these people sleep under tabloid articles or something? And all of these rumors started because of one woman and his shitty timing. Naruto was just glad his uniform sleeves were covering up the bandages all over his arms, or else he would never hear the end of it. So far he hadn't seen head or tail of the Grimmery girl or any other member of her little group. Just when the day had started to end, it looked like he was in the clear. Knowing your luck, Naruto. You spoke too soon. Teased Tsunade as she knew he had a penchant for getting into situations. Naruto just rolled his eyes. And now all he wanted to do was take a quick nap. Poke. Naruto groaned and dug himself further into the desk. Poke. He scratched his scalp and went back to trying to sleep. Poke 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 poke. The blonde man realized he wasn't going to be able to ignore this little pointy thing poking his head. So he slowly lifted his head up to see who was trying to get his attention. He was looking a small, almost doll-like little girl with fluffy white hair all around her delicate face. She was wearing their school uniform, but she didn't look old enough to be out of middle school. She had a little kitten hair clip on her bang, and her solid yellow eyes were completely focused on the blonde she was staring at. She didn't even have a proper expression on her face, she was just staring at Naruto blankly. Koneko perked up at her description and looked at her other self, wondering why she couldn't feel his chakra. Naruto noticed this as well and spoke up. I suppose this confirms it. If other Koneko can't feel my chakra, then something is wrong with my chakra network. Tsunade picked it up from here. Most likely whatever happened to throw you into their world must have damaged your chakra points to the point that you can no longer mold or feel chakra. Effectively meaning Naruto Uzumaki, the shinobi of the hidden leaf, is dead. I suspect the only reason you're alive is because you still technically have chakra, you just can't access it, so you're essentially like Lee but worse. Naruto nodded somberly. If his other self couldn't use chakra, that would be one thing, but what of Kurama? Naruto shook his head of those thoughts and decided he'll find out eventually. He just has to keep reading. And to be honest, he was so caught off guard by this girl's sudden appearance that he was just staying silent for a moment. Oh my god. It's Koneko-chan. She's so cute. WWW, what's our darling little angel doing here? And why is she talking to that brute? Maybe he's blackmailing her or something. He turned Koneko-chan into his little errand girl. Ah. Bastard. Making her his gopher like that. I want her to be my gopher too. Koneko just looked at the TV with a blank face and mumbled, I'll show you gopher. He didn't even do anything yet and the accusations were already flying around. He blinked a few times and placed his head on his folded arms. Hi. Hello. She responded in a quiet little voice. Who are you supposed to be? I am Koneko Taoju. I am a first-year student here. She bowed her head towards the sitting blonde. It's a pleasure to meet you. Naruto bowed his head lightly in a return to her respectful gesture. What can I help you with? This really is a mature Naruto, he's actually showing some respect. Tsunade said in disbelief. Hey. I can be mature. Replied Naruto only to get a flat look from Tsunade. I'm here to show you to our clubhouse. Naruto was completely silent for a moment. He slowly blinked his eyes and rubbed the sand out of them. Wait, are you? I'm a part of Ria's Grimmery Butchu's group. Koneko stayed silent for a moment before leaning in to whisper to him. She said to use that exact terminology to convince you. And that if you tried to trick me or run away at any point, I should sweep your legs and drag you there by your feet. Naruto had a lazy look on his face before he planted his head into the desk. He grumbled some muffled obscenities before standing up and grabbing his bag. All right. Show me the way. The odd side of the tall blonde senior and the petite white-haired freshman was talked about by everyone in the halls. Words were said. Rumors were spread. And whispers were hushed. After a few minutes of following the short girl around, they finally left the main building and were heading towards the large building outside that he knew as the old school building. He looked down at the girl in front of him. Is this it? Hi. She looked over her shoulder. This is the base of the Occult Research Club. Devil. Naruto and Koneko stepped into the main room of the building and were met with an extravagant interior design. The room was dimly lit, purposefully giving it an eerie look that went well with the concept of the occult. There were two couches opposite of each other with a small coffee table in between. And in the corner, the bath, and it was currently being used. Suddenly the perverted laughter of Issei was heard. Yes, I'm so close, if I just imagine it I can see Butchu's sweet melons. Naruto, Koneko, and Tsunade all deadpanned at his perverted antics. You might just give Pervy Sage a run for his money. Koneko glared and said pervert. Tsunade had a glint in her eye. You're a pervert, so by that logic, you should also have a pervert's durability. The moment Issei saw Tsunade stand up, he grabbed Asia's hand and ran. The poor girl tried to keep up with Issei, fortunately or unfortunately depending on how you look at it, she tripped and took Issei with her. Issei ended up in a position any healthy male would be jealous of. He had Asia's hands bound by his own and his knee nearing her crotch. The moment he saw Asia, something inside him changed. His heart suddenly started beating faster, he felt his hands become sweaty, and then all of a sudden he saw Yuma. Seeing the change in Issei's mood, Asia tried calling out to him Issei-san Issei-san. Huh? Issei looked confused, he didn't know what was happening. He looked and realized he was on top of Asia. When he looked into her eyes all he saw was concern. He immediately got up and apologized. Sorry about that Asia. I didn't mean to land on top of you when I fell. And no Issei-san, it wasn't your fault, I tripped and just took you with me. Are you okay? Issei lied, and with a fake smile he said yeah, I'm fine. Asia wasn't sure about it but decided to drop the topic for now because Tsunade was walking towards them. Tsunade noticed the look on Issei. Many shinobi that she treated had that look. He was obviously suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, but it seems he didn't want to worry Asia. She made a mental note to talk to Issei alone when they had the chance. You two lovebirds have a moment. Issei and Asia both sputtered and had to do a double take. I'm just messing with ya, come on, we still got a book to read. They both nodded and walked back with Tsunade. As they walked back they saw Naruto sitting in between Koneko and Rias. Don't ask cause I don't know what happened either. Naruto immediately said with a slight blush as he was giving Koneko head pats. Issei really wanted to say something about bastard blondes having all the luck but decided against it. Welcome back. Rias said with a smile. Asia, Issei and Tsunade thanked Rias and sat back down. The door off to the side creaked open and a beautiful ponytail-wearing woman walked in through it. She was holding a silver tray with a tea kettle and an assortment of sweets over it. She looked over to the two people who had just walked in and gave them a lovely smile. Oh, hello Koneko-chan. It wasn't too much trouble picking him up, right? Koneko shook her head, no. It was fine Akeno-senpai. There wasn't any trouble at all. She took a seat on the couch and had an interested look at the snacks in front of her. She looked up to the senior student, may I? Of course you can. She watched as the little girl started to delicately eat the chocolate sweets and smiled at her. She looked up to see the blonde man looking at her with a dry, unpleasant expression. Hello Naruto Uzumaki-san. It's nice to see you again. Naruto felt a chill go down his back. I am getting Snake Lady vibes from her. What do you mean by that? Issei inquired. Naruto, we already established that she's a sadist. Pay attention damn it. You sent me flying across the room, remember? Your fault not mine. Naruto pouted. Seeing as she won the conversation with Naruto, Tsunade began to explain what he meant by Snake Lady to Issei and the others. Anko Mitarashi is one of the biggest sadists we know, and if Naruto is getting weird vibes from your friend, then she must be pretty good. Issei gulped at that, a ninja sadist is one thing he'd never want to see. Akeno Himejima. You're a part of this. He sighed as he placed his bag to the side and sat on the empty couch. He looked up at the lovely woman. We have a bunch of classes together, and it wasn't you that decided to drag me along. If it was me you would probably do whatever you could to escape before I reached you. She tilted her head with a closed-eyed smile like that of an angel, but if we sent someone adorable like Koneko-chan, you wouldn't have been able to argue to her face. She's surprisingly convincing when she wants to be. I can vouch for that. Said Naruto, as he could not stop petting Koneko, who looked like she was in bliss. If he stopped she began to pout, and something within him wouldn't allow that to happen. The whiskered blonde looked over to the young girl that had barely spoken 20 words to him in one sentence and just sighed. Oh. Akeno, I heard someone else. Did Koneko come back with Naruto? Or did Yudo arrive with Issei? The woman in the shower asked loudly over the sound of rushing water. It's Koneko-chan, but you. Did the plan work? Perfectly. Naruto just shook his head sadly and laid on the couch, hoping to catch some rest before whatever was going to happen started. Ooh. Koneko-chan. The Academy's favorite Lolita first year. She's a part of the Devil Group too. An enthusiastic, very excited teenage voice yelled as someone entered through the Clubroom door. The young man looked over to the other woman, Akeno Himejima-san. The great one Isama of Kuo Academy. The last woman to be able to pull off a ponytail in the 21st century. Oh, so amazing. It's great. I can say for fact to say, my other self probably won't like you. Issei understood that unlike the Naruto he knew, other Naruto didn't get to know him. Sounds like a problem for other me. I am sitting on this couch enjoying myself. Everyone just looked at Issei for how callous he was being towards himself. What? Issei asked, but everyone refused to answer him. Shut up. Issei was silenced when a heavy school bag beamed him directly in the nose. He fell on his butt and rolled around on the ground in pain. Naruto had stark wide eye and a vein on his forehead in anger. I'm trying to sleep here, but your yelling is pissing me off. Issei Haidu wiped a teardrop forming in his eyes from the stinging pain before he looked at his attacker. He pointed in disbelief. "Hey Naruto-senpai, what are you doing here?" Naruto shot up and stood on the couch. "I'm here because of a certain idiot I thought I could help, but instead I got killed because he wanted to get laid." Issei looked up with a righteous fury. Any man would waste his life to get a busty beauty like Yuma-chan in bed. Naruto just looked at Issei in disappointment. Issei defended his actions by saying, "Hey. At least I'm open about my perversion. Unlike you, the ladies will know what they'll get." Naruto grew a tick mark and said, "At least a priestess asked me to sleep with her." Naruto's response threw everybody off. Nobody expected the knucklehead to say that. But before anyone could ask, Naruto continued to read. "Don't waste my life for your useless reasons, you prick." Naruto yelled angrily as he used all his willpower not to punch this brat into the ground. Although he had to hand it to him for having a sex drive rivaling that old pervert. Udo Kiba, the prince of Kuo, gave his usual smile at the scene of their two newest members, arguing so intently. He chuckled a little. "Well, our club hasn't been this exciting in a while now, huh?" Koneko just absent-mindedly nodded her head in agreement as Akeno placed a hand to her cheek and said, "Ara. Alright boys, that's enough." The commotion in the room stopped as they all looked over towards the crimson-haired woman as she walked out in her school uniform. She flicked her hair and smiled at them. "It's time for a history lesson. I suppose at this point I should begin to explain what's going on with our world now," said Rias as she began to get into lecture mode. "I am going to summarize for the sake of simplicity. For starters, we recently had a great war that ended a couple centuries ago. It was a war between the three factions, the devils, angels and fallen angels. It ultimately ended when most of the forces for all three sides were depleted. While we are not at peace, we have yet to fight an outright battle with any of the factions." Rias stated. As the war was being talked about, it only reminded Tsunade of the Third Great Ninja War and how it ended with the 5 great villages in a similar state. Devil. Issei was walking down the sidewalk back to his house. The lively young pervert's mind was currently filtering and filing through all the strange events that had happened over the last few days. The first thing he thought should be noted was the fact he had died and then immediately resurrected as a devil. Up next, he was now an official member of the Occult Research Club, which in his personal opinion was somehow a black hole for all of the hottest and most attractive people in school to flock to. Rias Gremory was the president in charge of the club. He got her permission to call her Butchu. Then there was the vice president, Akeno Himejima. Akeno-san was so pretty. And those sweater melons. And for regular members, there was Koneko Taoju, Koneko-chan. And Kiba. He really didn't care for that handsome bastard. "Well, at least you're honest to say," Naruto stated as he looked himself over. He knew he was a handsome bastard. The whiskers added to his charm. Yeah, whatever you say, Naruto." Issei responded, having no doubts Naruto was just trying to troll him. But as it turns out, it wasn't just a hotspot for the hotties to come to. It was really just a clever little cover for their real group activities as devils. Apparently Rias Gremory was actually a high-ranking devil, and every member of the orc was a part of her group. And despite the menacing title of devil, all they really did so far was hand out pamphlets to people for wishes and talk in the old school building. Which was a real relief for him because he really didn't want to do the whole reaping souls, boiling flesh and drinking blood thing he saw in the movies and shows. Apparently, he had something inside his body called a sacred gear that was very valuable to her group. When Issei was asked to summon it, by way of shooting out a Kamehameha and totally embarrassing himself in front of his new club, his left arm glowed with an unnatural light and a bulky red gauntlet formed from his elbow down. He wasn't ashamed to say it looked totally badass. "What is that? A pervert like Issei shouldn't have something like that," Naruto questioned. "Hey. Pervert or not, at least accept that my gauntlet is badass." Naruto acquiesced and said, "Fine, that gauntlet actually looks pretty cool." Also, the reason why he was attacked by the girl that he formerly knew as Yuma Mano was because she was part of an opposing group to the devils. A member of the fallen angels. And they had killed him because they were frightened that his sacred gear could be used against them. But you warned him to stay away from fallen angels by any means necessary. And right beside him in the inauguration to the orc was Naruto Uzumaki-senpai. And he didn't seem at all surprised or intrigued by the entire concept of devils and the supernatural. "To be fair, I've encountered all kinds of things," Naruto said to defend his other self. In fact, that was the last time Issei had seen Naruto at the club. Or even at school in general. He didn't want to be a part of their group in the slightest. And even when Butchu was calling to him to stay, he said, "I'm grateful for what you've done for me, really. But I don't want to be a part of a war that doesn't involve me. I promise if I meet any more of those fallen angel guys, I won't say anything about your club. See ya." And he walked out the front door. Butchu seemed a little miffed at that, but she shrugged her shoulders and just said she would figure a way to persuade him into their group later on. Rias knew if she could get him to show up once, she could do it again. She knew her other self would find a way. I know I'm not the greatest, but I know I won't give up on Naruto right then and there. But Issei already found his persuasion. If he worked hard enough, gained some experience and proved himself worthy, he could make a devil peerage of his own. And then he could finally realize his true dream, his own personal harem filled with beautiful, big-breasted women. So now he didn't care at all about blonde delinquent upperclassmen or fallen angels. All he cared about was passing out these flyers and getting closer to making his own harem. That doesn't seem like a reasonable goal at all, you'd be better off at least trying to get a girlfriend in general. Tsunade said as she judged Issei. Issei was crying, but even so he said even so. I will not give up on becoming the harem king. It's been my lifelong goal, I won't just abandon it. Naruto just ignored all of this and continued to read. Issei was so giddy that he creepily chuckled while walking down the sidewalk. And while he was distracted with his perverted dreams, he looked over to see a girl in a simple green habit and veil covering her face had tripped over. She moaned and she sat back up and rubbed her face. Issei blinked in surprise before he walked over to the young lady and offered his hand. Are you alright? Huh? She looked up at the young man that asked her the question and saw that he was reaching down to help her. She smiled nervously and took his hand to stand back up. Oh, thank you. I was. A strong wind passed by for a moment and the girl's nun cap was blown off her head. Her long golden locks were free for the world to see and her emerald eyes looked up at the man in front of her. Issei's eyes met with the beautiful foreigners for what felt like hours. And all that came to mind was, wow. Asia was happy to know that Issei thought she was beautiful, she doubled down on her plan to get Issei to notice her. Oh. I so sorry about my fall. I don't know where I going and am I, the golden-haired young lady nervously sputtered in rough Japanese as she tried to apologize and thank the man that had helped her. She was probably speaking in a rough accent as she tried to use a language she had only recently started to learn. Thank goodness, one of the perks to being a devil was the ability to understand other languages so easily. It's alright. You don't need to apologize. He reassured the young blonde girl. She perked up when she heard him talk and had a hopeful smile on her face. Why, you speak Italian? Oh, that's wonderful. I was having such a hard time adjusting around here because I couldn't properly communicate with anyone. She grabbed his hands and looked up at him with a beautiful kind smile. She nodded her head. Thank you for helping me. Issei immediately felt embarrassed, he wasn't used to compliments, but Asia finally got the full picture of how he met her, and he said, Asia, no matter what, I'll always be glad to meet and help you. Asia grew red in embarrassment and hugged Issei. Issei-san, thank you for helping me get to where I am now. No worries, Asia, you know I'd do anything for you. Responded Issei with a slight blush. Rias saw what was happening, she was happy for Issei and Asia, but she couldn't help feeling a bit jealous. Here she had two members of her peerage slowly getting closer, meanwhile she was stuck in an arranged marriage that she wanted nothing to do with. Tsunade opted to take another sip of her sake and Naruto saw the disgruntled look of Rias. What's up, Rias? Thinking about that bullshit arrangement? Not really, I see Issei and Asia getting along so well, I wish I could have a bond like them. They seem to be getting closer and closer every chance they get. Bonds are weird, you know. Sometimes they take drastic things to be built upon and sometimes all it takes is a simple hello. Well, I don't know the relationship between Issei and Asia, it's clear to me that they've been through hardship together. Naruto put a hand on Ria's shoulder and said, we may be from completely different worlds, heck maybe we were never supposed to meet at all, but still, I can say for a fact that I'm glad I met you, Rias. Rias had an atomic blush, he was a bit of an idiot, he seemed kind of dense, but most of all he treated her like she was just Rias. Rias didn't want to take advantage of his kindness, but if he offered to help her, she knew she wouldn't say no. Turning away slightly she said, I'm glad I met you too, Naruto, just having your support helps me a lot. Naruto had a fox-like grin and said, if you ever need help, let me know, I'll come running and we can solve it together, you know. Rias had a genuine smile, somehow she knew things would work out in the end. While all this was happening, Koneko didn't understand why everyone was getting all mushy, she just wanted to keep being petted, so she pestered Naruto with pokes until he continued. Issei felt a blush run over his face when the beautiful stranger was showing her gratitude. He chuckled and scratched the back of his head. It was nothing, really. But still, thank you. You're the first person I've met since coming here that she stopped in the middle of her sentence and touched the top of her head. Her eyes widened and she yelped before covering her mouth in shock. Issei blinked in shock. What's wrong? My cap. It was blown off by the wind. I was so distracted that I didn't even notice. She got on her hands and knees and started to look around the sidewalk for any signs of her nun cap. She seemed worried. If I lose it, I would have failed the church in my duties. Issei heard the concern in her voice and felt bad if he just left. He looked around in the immediate area and saw the little white cap resting on top of a bush. He smiled and picked it out of the twigs, found it. The girl stood back up and saw the man she had just met holding her cap and wiping some leaves out of it. She had a huge smile and clapped her hands together. Oh, thank you. I don't know what I would have done if I had lost it. It's no problem. He held it out for her as she took it from his hand. They looked at each other and Issei felt a sense of ease settle between them. He smiled. I'm Issei Haidu. The girl blinked and nodded her head. My name is Asia Argento. It's very nice to meet you, Issei-san. Rias smiled knowing that it would all work out with Asia, but inwardly she knew Issei might have to see Asia die again. Devil, oh man. Naruto groaned as he looked at the third apron he had bought from his boss in the last few days. It was night time again and Naruto was taking his usual route through the park to get back home. He sighed, I'm giving that old man all the money I've got already, now he's just taking it out of my reserves. He shrugged his shoulders and lost all signs of annoyance. Oh well, as long as it goes to the same goal then whatever. Naruto-senpai. Naruto froze in place as a small sense of dread started to build up inside him. He turned his neck so slowly and painfully that the clicks of his neck could actually be heard from the underclassmen. Issei was looking at him in surprise as he walked his bike over to the taller blonde. He questioned, this is the second time I've met you here. Do you always take this route home? Naruto grumbled and looked away from the younger man. Yeah. It's a straight way home and it's the fastest to go through. What of it? Why haven't you come back to the club yet? Are you really not grateful to Butchu for what she did for us? There's a difference between being grateful and running into a war you know nothing about. He looked back to the brunette and raised an eyebrow. Have you found something to risk your life for like that since I left? Issei contemplated the words other Naruto said. He obviously still wanted to have a harem, but he remembered Asia's dead body and clenched his fist and thought never again, I won't let something like that happen to someone I care about. Naruto gave Issei a smile when he saw Issei steel himself. He kind of reminded him of himself when he met Haku. I'm sure he's gotten a hint now. Of course I have. Issei proclaimed loudly as manly tears streamed down his face and he clenched his fist. I will rank up in the devil world. I will gain followers of my own. And then, only then, can I fulfill my dream of having a harem of beauties by my side. Naruto just gave an unamused look at the man and blinked slowly. He walked over to Issei and patted his shoulder. Congrats kid. You are now in the running for biggest pervert I've ever met. He gave him a sagely nod and started to walk away again. That's a very hard list to get into at such a young age. You have some great hero skill. Oh thank you. Yeah I try really hard and wait. Stop misdirecting me, damn it. He pointed at the slightly taller blonde with a burning passion in his eyes. I won't just let you waste Butchu's gift like this. Naruto stopped walking away and stayed silent for a moment. He turned around and looked back at Issei. Look kid, I'm not a kid. Damn it man I told you I was only a year younger than you. I'm Issei you bastard. And Issei. Kid. Pervert. Fuck face. Whatever. Don't call me fuck face, asshole. Our others may not like each other yet Naruto, but I'm sure we'll at least get along at some point. Stated Issei trusting the feeling in his gut. Naruto simply nodded in agreement. Listen. Naruto exclaimed as he threw out his hand and stopped their argument before it started spinning out of control. He lowered his hand as his face took on a more serious visage. Has it hit you yet? Issei blinked in confusion and tilted his head like an innocent animal. He looked at Naruto. Has what hit me? Well, you've probably thought about it a little. About what? Issei asked more directly as he was anxious to hear what the upperclassman had to say. We died. Issei tried to hide the fear that threatened to show on his face as he gulped. A cold sweat ran down the back of his neck and he nervously laughed. Why yeah, we did. But we were brought back as devils. So it's alright. It ain't so easy to come back from death and not feel a thing Issei. Naruto stated flatly. Why yeah I know, I've been trying to ignore it since it happened. Replied Osamu Issei. Asia grabbed Issei's hand to show her support and he smiled at her once again. It felt like he would be relying on her for a bit. Seeing this Naruto, Tsunade, Rias and even Koneko had a small smile knowing he'd get through it. You're a shitty liar. Naruto interrupted as he pointed at the boy's face. You went all pale and you're sweating like a politician under oath. Even if we were brought back, that ain't something we can just throw off as a small inconvenience. Some people can walk off near-death experiences if they are strong enough, but dealing with real death and then coming back is a whole other matter. That's terrifying. Issei shook his head and gave a weak smile. So what? People die every day. We were lucky enough to be brought back. And we came back from it. That doesn't mean we just forget it. He looked to Issei. We all have our own ways of dealing with something like that Issei. You can try to ignore it and work towards that harem dream for now, but you'll have to deal with it at some point. And trust me, the sooner the better. Issei took a moment to consider what the blonde man had said and felt a fear start forming in the back of his mind. As much as he wanted to say otherwise, he knew Naruto was right. Sometimes the memories of Yuuma's smile and her soundless talking as the light faded out of his eyes started re-emerging in his mind. He was working in the club and doing all these requests as a chance to distract his thoughts. because he felt like if he stopped for a moment he would start spiraling. Naruto started to walk back home, but one last call from Issei stopped him. "Wait. How come you are so cool with all of this?" Naruto looked back to him and shrugged his shoulders, "Because I've already accepted it. Once before." "What did your other mean by that, Naruto-san?" Asia asked. "I got pretty close to dying a few times, so I don't know which event other me is talking about. If anything at all, it was probably the event that led me to your world, and I can only think of 1 or 2 instances where it could have happened." Naruto replied casually. Rias, Koneko, Asia and Issei were really curious now. The more they got to know Naruto, the more they wanted to know about his world. Issei spoke up and said, "Whenever there's time, think you can tell us your story, Naruto." "Sure. I can't say I'll recall everything perfectly, but poof poof." Before Naruto could finish, 2 small discs titled Naruto and Naruto Shippuden appeared with a DVD player. "I guess you won't have to remember a thing after all." Deadpanned Tsunade as she saw the objects appear. "I think we should save these for later," suggested Rias, even though she really wanted to learn more about Naruto. Naruto nodded and said, "Yeah, besides we're almost done with this chapter anyways. So I'll finish it off now." Issei was left alone in the park as the weird blonde man walked away. He lowered his head in worry before his eyes momentarily looked off to the side where he was slain by Yuma. He shuddered a little before jumping back on his bike and riding towards his next destination. That's the end of this chapter. Does anyone want to read the next one? Offered Naruto. Before anyone could opt in to read, a flash of light appeared. The moment the flash of light disappeared, out came another young woman. She had cherry blossom colored hair, emerald colored eyes, her hair was just past shoulder length. She also wore a red zip-up shirt and a lilac colored skirt with long black open-toed boots. Said woman was regaining clarity when she heard a familiar voice call her over. "Sakura-chan. Over here," shouted Naruto as he waved his hand, unknowingly making Koneko wince. Koneko glared at Naruto because he heard her hearing, not that he knew, and most importantly he stopped her head pats. Sakura looked on in disbelief. Here in this random room she saw her teammate sitting in between a beautiful crimson-haired woman and a younger-looking girl with snow-colored hair. Across from them, she saw her master casually drinking sake and a brown spiky-haired boy next to a blonde-haired girl. Sakura decided to ask Lady Tsunade, "Naruto, what the hell is going on?" Tsunade decided to answer Sakura's question because Naruto was currently occupied with Koneko. She began to explain what was currently happening. The concept of devils, angels, and even fallen angels were explained to her, but it seemed she struggled to accept the concept. "If you still can't believe that explanation, here." Rias decided to intervene and show her wings. Sakura widened her eyes for a moment and just decided to let her suspension of disbelief go. If Naruto could contain and befriend a giant mountain-sized fox, she could accept this. Shrugging her shoulders, the now-named Sakura said, "I should introduce myself. I'm Sakura Haruno, a kunoichi of the Hidden Leaf Village and Naruto's teammate." After Sakura introduced herself to Rias and her peerage, she sat down next to Tsunade and hoped to help control Tsunade's sake intake. "Now that introductions are out of the way, who wants to read the next chapter?" asked Naruto, pushing the book away from him like it was a disease. Grabbing the book, Tsunade said, "I'll do it, besides all I need is my sake." Rias, Koneko, Asia and Issei sweat dropped at that fact. She hasn't stopped drinking since the start of the last chapter. How much alcohol could one sake bottle have? Rias leaned forward on her desk and looked down at her notes while the teacher continued on with the lesson. She was pretty smart. She could afford to have her mind wander for a moment. She was far more concerned about the fact that last night, her new pawn had stumbled upon a psychopathic and extremely vulgar exorcist that appeared to be working for the fallen angels that had been appearing around town. Issei spoke with a frown. That priest was a freak. Issei had nearly been killed by the insane priest and would have died if it wasn't for her and everyone else arriving in the nick of time to save him. And it appeared that Issei had become enamored by a strange young nun that was at the center of this conflict. In the midst of their faction battle, the blonde-haired girl was desperately reaching out to Issei and trying to heal him before he succumbed to his wounds. And that priest, Fried Selzen, didn't seem to appreciate her act of mercy. If his rough treatment and threat of raping her was anything to go off of, all Asia could do was hug Issei at the memories of that night. Issei whispered to her, "It's okay, Asia, we got through that once, we'll get through it again." Hearing the threat of rape, Sakura cracked her fist and said, "Oh, I am so going to pound his head in." Instantly Rias and Koneko nodded in agreement. Someone like Fried should not be allowed to live. But before she was taken away, that Asia girl had done some basic treatment to Issei's wounds. A sacred gear that could heal fallen angels and devils. That meant she was an invaluable asset for anyone that could get their hands on her. Sakura and Tsunade paid extra attention to this detail. Maybe they could teach Asia a thing or two on how to be a medic. Sakura looked over to Asia and thought. She doesn't look like much of a fighter, so combat medic is out of the way for the time being. Doesn't mean I can't teach her how to dodge and maybe teach her a bit more on the human body. But Issei seemed interested in her for a different reason. Something that made him plead to Rias to let him chase after them. But that was just a death wish she could not grant for the new pawn. Trying to recklessly instigate a raid against an experienced exorcist and who knows how many fallen angels was not something she approved. Speaking of reckless pawns, she still hadn't persuaded Naruto to join their club yet. They had been so busy integrating Issei into the group that they hadn't tried to coax the whiskered man in a few days. He hadn't shown up at school and Rias didn't know where he lived because it wasn't recorded anywhere. And she couldn't teleport to his location either because the evil piece she used for him didn't seem to respond to her seal. She just knew something was up with that pawn piece her brother gave to her. She just didn't think it was defective. Could evil pieces be defective? And if they could, it shouldn't have worked on Naruto in the first place if it didn't function properly, right? DCH. Stupid Ani-sama. Achu. Jasundit, Surzicha-sama. Well, whatever the circumstances, she had one dejected pawn and one runaway pawn. Rias just sighed and shook her head. At the moment, she kinda felt like her position as king of the peerage was teetering on the edge. Tsunade glanced at Rias for a moment, smirked, and knew she'd get through something like this. After all, you can't call yourself a king if this is enough to push you to the edge. Naruto sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. I'm sure my other self didn't mean to add to your load, but I did say it wouldn't be easy. Rias shook her head and smiled. You did, but a little stress won't put me down. I won't give up just because other you feels rebellious. Remori-san seems kind of out of it, don't you think? I wonder what's on her mind. But you know, even when she looks worried, she's still so sexy. It's totally turning me on. Rias just had a blank look, she couldn't be bothered when this was all anyone ever had to say about her. Sakura felt for Rias, at a time she was a fangirl, it took a while, but her master eventually beat it out of her. Rias had a dry expression when she heard her classmates whisper between themselves. And everyone wondered why she never showed interest in getting married. This was why she wasn't interested in having a romantic relationship with a man or woman. It was just too bothersome. Devil. Issei leaned against a park bench, his head hung back sullenly as he thought about his failure. He closed his eyes, and the scene just kept playing back over and over in his head. Issei-san. Hearing Asia scream his name as she was taken away by that bastard priest, well, this useless pawn just fell to the floor. The fear in her face while tears spilled out of her eyes was burnt into his head. He rubbed his face with his hands and groaned. He felt so worthless. But you told him that in the group of evil pieces, he was a pawn, the lowest of the low. And he believed that now more than ever. Issei couldn't properly explain why he was so sad about Asia. She was a sister. A former member of the clergy from the church. And she was now a part of the fallen angel faction, the group that had actually ended his life. And yet Issei just couldn't bring himself to hate her. It's cause y'all formed a bond. It wasn't for long but it became strong. Naruto said as he thought about Haku. Asia thought about what he said and had a bright smile. Hopefully, she'd be able to make more bonds. But if he met her again, now that she knew he was a devil, would she hate him? Of course, she would. Their factions had been at war for ages. She had probably been raised since she was just a child to hate their very existence. There was no point in him trying to save her from a group she trusted more than devils. Asia innocently got close to Issei and whispered, I could never hate you, Issei. After all, you were my first. Sakura coughed at that. Wow. Asia phrasing, please watch your phrasing. Issei managed to sputter out. Issei sighed and stood out of his seat. If he saw her again, it was probably going to be his enemies. That was their fate now. They couldn't change that. He was walking down the rocky path set in the park as he just needed to distract his mind from everything. A set of feet ruffled the pebbles behind him. Issei-san. The perverted teen's eyes widened in shock before he spun around to see who had called him. Standing there in the middle of the path, a surprised look on her face, was the golden-haired sister he was thinking about until just a moment ago. Issei prepared himself for whatever she had to say about his new life and the monstrosity he had become, only to see a big smile and a small tear form in her eye at the sight of him. She cried happily, oh thank goodness you're alright. I was so worried about you. Issei's eyes widened in shock again as she wiped the tears out of her eyes. She looked up at him, I was so worried about your injury and I thought you may have suffered worse from them. So I came out here too. Asia was interrupted when Issei almost tackled her and wrapped his arms around her small body. She was caught off guard and looked to the side of his face. Issei-san. Thank God. He ignored the spike of pain that ran through his head at saying God's name and just tightened his hold on Asia's body. Small tears came out of his eyes as he tried to contain his joy at seeing her again. He sobbed, I didn't think I would ever get to see you again, Asia. The devils felt a tinge of pain but smiled soon after. For as much as Koneko didn't like perverts, at least it seems like Issei wouldn't abandon those he cares about, so with reluctance, she respected him just a bit more. Rias smiled and thought, she knew reincarnating Issei wasn't a mistake. Asia smiled and returned his hug. The two of them stood there silently in the park as they ignored the rules and expectations of their respective factions. The nun and the devil. And they couldn't be happier. This reminds me of a forbidden romance story. Cooed Sakura. Issei and Asia had a red face at that. Romance? Are we reading the same book, Sakura? Asked a confused Naruto. Sakura palmed her face and realized this was Naruto after all. Rias and Koneko just deadpanned at the dense blonde. No way was somebody this dense. Devil, what are you doing here, Asia? Isn't it dangerous for you to be out with me? Issei questioned as he walked alongside the kind-hearted nun down the shopping district. He didn't mind spending time with her again, but if it meant she might get hurt in some way, then he wanted to prevent that at all costs. Asia shook her head and no, it's quite alright, Issei-san. If I have to leave soon, then she had a sad look on her face for a moment as she didn't want Issei to see her. I want to spend it with someone I know. Issei stopped in the middle of his walk, letting Asia take a few steps forward until she noticed he was lagging. She turned around. Issei-san. Come on, Asia. Issei took her hand and started to lead her through the street. He looked back to her. We are going to have fun today. I know a bunch of fun places we can go to. Look, they're even going on a date. Gushed Sakura. Issei and Asia's faces grew even redder. Naruto wanted to say that it wasn't a date, but the look he got from Sakura and surprisingly Rias and Koneko just stopped him from attempting anything. I can't believe a priestess wanted to sleep with him. Maybe it was just male swagger. Thought Koneko. Asia smiled up at him. Really? Yeah. We can go to the arcade. Or the movies. There are a bunch of places we can go shopping or rumble. Issei stopped and placed his hand on his stomach as it started to rumble out of hunger. He chuckled and felt embarrassed in front of the girl. Sorry about that. I haven't eaten today. Actually, Asia smiled and poked her fingers together. I haven't eaten either. Issei decided that the first thing on today's agenda was food. He looked around and tried to spot a suitable place to eat. Asia deserved the best kind of food. A high-class restaurant. Nope, couldn't afford it. Maybe. Issei stopped when he saw an open but small shop in comparison to the one surrounding it. The first thing that caught his eye was the little mascot on top of it. A little bowl of ramen with limbs and black eyes. Well, that's definitely different. Stated Issei as he regained his composure. Huh? What you mean by that? Asked Naruto. We went to a burger joint instead. I can only assume this shop closed since you never made it to our world. Replied Issei. Issei felt like he had seen that somewhere before. Oh, that place looks good. Let's go, Issei-san. Asia started running towards the little ramen shop. Wait, Asia. Wouldn't you rather go somewhere nicer? But that little mascot is so cute. She squealed back before resuming her run towards the shop. He didn't know why, but he felt hesitant going into the restaurant. They walked through the front door. It was basically an empty shop. There were a set of tables spaced out around the whole store, but there weren't any customers to be seen. There was a counter at the back of the restaurant that anyone could come up to sit and watch as their meal was made. And then, a greeter popped out of the back room. Welcome to our little shop of dreams. A certain whiskered blonde greeted them with a smile on his face. He gestured for them to come in. How many are we seating to? BFT, hahaha. Sakura couldn't hold in her laughter. Naruto of all people in customer service. This had to be a joke. Naruto for some reason felt like he was being made fun of. Naruto instantly shut up when his eyes met with a stunned Issei. The two men clammed up and were frozen in place as Asia looked around the empty store with starry eyes. Ah. Naruto-senpai. Stop squeezing. Issei yelled in agony as Naruto's hand started to crush the teen's skull within his palm. Naruto had a cold expression as he completely ignored the blonde girl that walked around the little ramen shop. Whoa, Lady Tsunade wasn't joking when she said you were basically a less broody version of Sasuke, you're even violent now. Sakura joked. Naruto felt a tick mark at being compared to Sasuke. Don't compare the great me to the bastard. Sakura began to crack her fist at the insult of their other teammate Naruto. The hell did you just say? Nothing. I didn't mean anything by it, I swear. Naruto soon cowered. Koneko decided then and there that she liked Sakura. An old man walked out of the back and saw their empty shop with a few more people than he was used to. He asked, Naruto. What's happening? Naruto let go of Issei's face and looked back at the old man. Nothing. We've got 2 customers. Ah, that's good. Here, show them up to the counter. Got it? Naruto saluted before he dropped to his knees and looked at the brown-haired teen as he stopped screaming in pain. Naruto glared. You didn't come here to take me to your club, right? At least you're more sociable than when Sasuke was brooding. Laughed Sakura. You got me there. Agreed Naruto. I didn't even know you were here, you psychopath. Issei snarled as he rubbed his face. Oh, then why are you here? I'm here with Asia. Asia? Naruto looked over his shoulder to see a young blonde girl sitting on the swivel chair and laughing as she spun around. Naruto looked at Issei in surprise. You're on a date. Really? What's wrong with it, you bastard? I have trouble believing perverts are able to get dates with a girl like Asia. Naruto stated flatly. Hey, what's that supposed to mean? Retorted Issei, only for Asia to show her support by patting him in the back. Nothing. Nothing. Naruto said as he motioned with his hands for the younger man to calm down. Naruto stood back up and started walking to the counter. Come on, don't leave your girlfriend behind. Issei wanted to argue that she wasn't his girlfriend, but the whiskered man was already gone. Issei sat beside Asia and looked over the menu. Issei ordered a miso ramen, and Asia had the same because she couldn't read the menu. A minute later, their orders were placed in front of them by the blonde waiter. You two enjoy that. I need to head to the back. Tell him when you're done. The old owner said as he headed into the back room again and left Naruto to wash the dishes. Asia looked at the bowl of noodles and soup. It smelled wonderful and she couldn't wait to dig in. But first, her prayer. She clasped her hands. Bless us our Lord, and these thy gift. Please, let it end. Let it end. Cried Issei the moment the prayer began. He and the others felt a spike of pain. I'm sorry. Asia apologized and tried to bow. Naruto, Sakura and Tsunade just stared flatly. Naruto and Issei instantly cringed and grasped their heads in pain as what felt like a spike had been lodged in their heads. They were writhing in pain as Asia continued her innocent prayer. She finished up and broke apart the chopsticks. Naruto pulled himself back up to his feet with a look of horror on his face. He looked to the other devil. What the hell was that? I should probably explain that. Interrupted Rias as her migraine finally ended. Since we're the natural enemies to angels, if we're around prayers to his name that I cannot say, we generally feel some pain from it. She explained. Well, that absolutely sounds like a terrible weakness anybody could exploit if they wanted to. Sakura stated. Naruto just continued to pet Koneko. He felt for his other self, but he was sure he'd be fine. Issei struggled to get the migraine out of his head as he looked over to a confused Asia. That would be the effect that happens when we are close to someone praying, or if we use God's name. Praying? Asia realized her mistake and looked between them in shock. She bowed her head. I'm so sorry. That's a force of habit. I should have thought about your well-being instead. But I was always taught to pray before and after a meal to show my thanks to the Lord for blessing us with our meal. But it would be wrong to do it when I know it may hurt you. Still, I can't eat a meal without saying my thanks. Asia started to have a little existential crisis, while Naruto just looked at her dryly in confusion. He looked over to the pervert who had already started to eat his ramen. Issei looked at him. She's a nun. A nun? Naruto looked between the mismatched couple and chuckled a little. A nun and a devil walk into a shop. Feels like a startup to a dirty joke. Naruto raised his hands in defense. I have no idea what other me is talking about, Ikno. Issei furrowed his eyes at the older student as he laughed at their situation. Issei turned to the side. Asia. Asia looked up from where she was awkwardly holding a chopstick in both hands to try and pick up some noodles and looked at Issei. Yes. This is Naruto Uzumaki-senpai, a third year at my school and a recent addition to the devil peerage I'm a part of. Despite how much he protests. Issei then looked to Naruto. Naruto-senpai, Asia Argento. Other me is a rebel. Shouted Naruto in support of his other self. Sakura rolled her eyes and said, yeah, rebel, like the time you ditched the academy to paint the Hokage monument only to get caught by Iruka not long after. Naruto deflated at that. Sakura looked to Rias and said, even if his other self is a bit more mature deep down, he's still a knucklehead. I'm sure you'll get to him soon enough. Rias smiled at her support and said a thanks. Asia and Naruto looked at each other before the younger blonde bowed her head. She looked at him hesitantly. Are you really a devil as well? Apparently. Naruto deadpanned as he looked the meek girl over. She seemed worried as he looked at her, but she didn't reach for a hidden weapon and she didn't act like she was being kept as a hostage. Naruto scrunched his face in confusion. Shouldn't you be attacking us or something? Asia looked at him in shock and shook her head vigorously. And no. Of course I wouldn't. Why would you think that? To be fair, at this point shouldn't all you factions be at war with each other? Asked Sakura. Rias hummed in thought before she answered. You weren't here before this was brought up as a topic, but to keep it short, we have a kind of temporary truce going on. Sakura nodded, hoping they would also achieve peace soon enough. Well, because aren't all these factions at war? Naruto droned out as he just focused on cleaning the bowls and other appliances. He looked over at Asia as Issei sent a little glare at him for making her uncomfortable. From what I've experienced, everyone on one side hates everyone else on the other sides, and they won't even spare a moment before attacking. So shouldn't that mean you are supposed to keep away from us? Don't bother Asia like that, jerk. Issei responded heatedly as Naruto just gave him a flat stare. Until Issei blinked in realization and looked at Asia as well. Actually Asia, I was kind of wondering the same thing. Shouldn't you hate people like us? Asia looked uncomfortable as she held the sides of the bowl. She tried to avoid their eyes. Well, it's true I was raised by the church to never forgive the members of the other factions. It's also the reason why I was excommunicated from my church as well. Asia's face told much about the pain and sadness she had experienced over the years. Her eyes became heavy and she looked like she was trying her hardest not to cry. I found a wounded devil near our church that was close to death. I couldn't leave him to perish, so I used my twilight healing to fix his wounds. But when the heads of our church had heard that my powers not only heal humans and angels, but devils and fallen angels as well, they branded me as a witch and cast me out. I should be angry. Issei clenched his fist and held his tongue. He wanted to scream out how unfair the church was towards Asia, but he held himself better. It sounds like a setup. Naruto said flatly while clenching his fist. He was angry, a girl like Asia shouldn't have gotten exiled in the first place. All she did was help somebody, but even more suspicious was a devil being near a church in the first place. After thinking about it, Rias agreed with the sentiment. It doesn't make any sense, no devil worth their salt would approach a church. It was one of the reasons I wouldn't allow Issei to interact with Asia at the time. Even so. I'm glad I met all of you, if that didn't happen, I don't know where I'd be. So thank you for taking me in, but you. Asia stated as she bowed. Rias smiled at her, but deep down she knew she didn't just revive Asia out of the kindness of her heart. She was still a devil, she knew she was greedy. Issei was shocked and horrified when he heard Asia's tale. A wave of uncontrollable anger grew in his chest as all he wanted to do at the moment was find those bastards in charge of the church and show them what a real demon was like. Naruto just shook his head. Hearing the anger and hatred people had for each other here made him sick. If this girl had learned to hate devils to their very core, he really wouldn't be surprised. But Asia had a small smile on her face. I can't bring myself to hate them. Or anyone. I know that may seem silly and naive, but I don't think we can ever solve anything like this war by just trying to kill each other. I think all life is precious. That's the lesson I felt was most important from everything I've learned from the Lord. And even though I was told the other factions were full of monsters that went against everything the Lord had to teach us, she looked at Issei with a warm smile as tears formed in her eyes. The way you treat me with such kindness gives me hope that we can resolve all this hatred without any more suffering. Issei could only look at Asia in surprise. Even after all the pain, suffering, and injustices that had happened to her, she was still so pure-hearted. She was like an angel. All of a sudden Asia felt something rubbing her head, it felt warm and kind like she had an older brother watching over her. When she looked up she saw Naruto grinning and petting her, and he said, I've been called naive for a similar way of thinking, but I can say if you put your heart and soul into it, it'll work out. Asia began to tear up at the support and hugged Naruto. Issei wanted to say something, but when he saw how happy Asia was to just have the support he decided to stay quiet. Now that he looked at it they could pass off as siblings in a way. A rough palm landed on her head and patted her hair. She looked up and saw Naruto giving her a small but wise smile. He laughed a little, that really might be a pretty naive way of thinking during a war. But if the world had more people like you in it, I'd bet there would be a lot less suffering in it. Asia had an embarrassed blush on her face from Naruto's kind words and Issei's smile. She just held her chopsticks like she did before and struggled to pick up some more noodles. Naruto took the chopsticks out of her hands and placed them in her left hand properly. He walked back to do his chores, make sure you blow on them. They're really hot. Issei couldn't help but smile at what he saw. The senior that always walked away from him just couldn't leave an awkward girl like Asia by herself like that. He wasn't so bad after all. I told you Naruto, at some point our others are going to get along, maybe not like us but it'll be close enough. Stated Issei. Devil. Issei and Asia were walking through the park again as the sun started to set. They had spent the entire afternoon together. They had watched movies, played at the arcade, Issei even won her a stuffed animal to keep. Asia hugged the little rat plushie a little closer to her chest as she looked around the park. She smiled at Issei, thank you Issei-san, for everything you've done today. Issei just chuckled, don't mention it. No, really. This is the most fun I've had in my life. Asia hugged the little toy in her arms tighter as she committed the wonderful memories today in her head, I've never had any friends before. And I always wondered what it was like to play with someone like this. I'm glad I was able to at least once. Hearing this Naruto swore Asia was trying to say goodbye, but he looked at Issei and Asia and smiled, things worked out in the end. I'll have a bit of faith, maybe me being there smooths things out a bit. It doesn't have to be just once. Asia looked over to Issei as he smiled at her. He walked over to her, I'm your friend, Asia. And I always will be. We can do this again for as long as you like. Because I want us to be friends forever. Asia looked up at him as he smiled down at her. And tears started coming down her face as her nose started to sniffle. Issei worried and panicked, what's wrong? Did I say something I wasn't supposed to? And no, it isn't that Issei-san. I would love to be your friend and do this again. But she can't. Not after today. Issei and Asia looked up in shock as a figure stood on the top of the fountain. A woman with large black wings coming out of her back and covering them in a setting shadow. Uma Mano. She was even wearing the same clothes as before. Naruto and Sakura narrowed their eyes. Even if Issei was reincarnated, he was still practically a civilian who knew nothing about fighting. Issei looked down and clenched his teeth. Even if Naruto was there, it seemed like Asia was still gonna be kidnapped and killed. Issei's eyes shrunk in horror. "Why Uma-chan? Rainer-sama." Asia squeaked out as she hid behind Issei. Rainer sighed when she saw Issei's horror-stricken face. She looked down at him as she floated to the ground. "Wasn't it enough that I killed you once before? Now you have to stand in my way again?" She sighed and shook her head before looking him over. "Oh wait, looks like you grew a set of horns since I last saw you, huh? Naughty boy." Rainer looked past him and towards Asia. "Come along, Asia. I won't be mad at you if you be a good girl from here on out." Aye. Asia isn't going anywhere with you," Issei proclaimed as his face was full of anger and fury for the black-haired fallen angel. She just gave him an unamused look. "Shouldn't you know where this is heading? We've done this song and dance before. And that blonde boy won't be here this time to save you, Issei-kun. I don't need Naruto to save my ass for every single thing." Issei started with a snarl. "I hope you can keep your word, Issei. If my gut is right, then things are just gonna get harder from here." "So what? If it gets harder from here, then I'll just keep on getting stronger and stronger. I won't let anybody harm the people I care about." Naruto couldn't help but have a feral grin. Issei was finally getting it. "I don't need him." Issei waved his left hand out. "Sacred gear." A brilliant light shined from his left arm before a large red gauntlet formed around it. He held it up and the gem at the center of the hand glowed. "Boost." Rainer's whistled. "Wow. You really did have a sacred gear. I was right." "Yeah. I've got one." And now Issei gripped his fists and prepared for battle. "I'm gonna use it too." Shwick. Blood spewed out of Issei's mouth and coated his chin as he fell to his knees. He weakly lowered his head to see the spear of light that had pierced through his stomach. Just a few inches south of where he had been killed before. He really hated this fucking park. Koneko just stared at Issei with a blank face, while Rias felt a tinge of embarrassment. By this point, she should have at least had Kiba teaching Issei the basics. "You've got a lot to learn when it comes to fighting, Issei," Sakura stated flatly. Issei only looked down in embarrassment and mumbled. Well, I still didn't know what I was doing completely yet. I have an idea now at least." He fell to his side as the burning sensation faded with the light spear. Another pool of blood started to form around his fallen body. Asia's heart sank as she cried for him. "Issei-san." Rainer walked forward and summoned another spear into her hand. She smiled. "This time, I'll make sure you stay dead." But before Rainer could bring her weapon down upon the defeated devil, Asia stood in front of him with a desperate look in her eyes. Rainer glared at her. "Move. Please. You don't have to do this." "He thinks he can take my toy and get away with it. I don't think so. Please just leave him alone." Rainer dispersed her weapon and harshly grabbed Asia's cheeks. She brought the girl's terrified face up to hers. "You know, I don't actually need you in perfect condition. If I took off one of your arms or legs, it wouldn't matter. As long as you're still breathing, that's enough for me." Asia had tears in her eyes and struggled to stay brave. She looked up at the fallen angel. I won't run away." "Oh? I won't try to run and fight anymore. You can take my sacred gear if you want." Just Asia couldn't contain her tears anymore as sadness filled her voice. "Just please, don't hurt Issei-san anymore." Rainer considered it for a moment before letting go of Asia and nodding her head. "Alright, fine. I'll keep you to that." So even here Asia still goes with Rainer. "I'll have to thank Asia later for saving Issei again," thought Rias. Koneko just looked at Asia and gave her a thumbs up. She knew they'd go and rescue her other. Asia nodded her head and turned to the boy before falling to her knees. She used her twilight healing to fix most of his wound before it became too severe. His skin started to reform and the blood loss started to weaken. Some color returned to Issei's face as he was barely even able to lift his head. "Hey Asia. I'm sorry Issei-san. You got hurt because of me again. And I'm so sorry. But it's alright now. Now I won't get you hurt anymore." Asia placed the stuffed rat he had won for her in front of him and started to walk over to Rainer's side. She looked back at him with a grateful smile. "Thank you for everything." Issei desperately tried to reach out to her but couldn't find the strength. Rainer grasped the girl's shoulder and they disappeared in a shower of black feathers. Issei was left there in a pool of blood as tears rolled down his face and merged with the red beneath. He had failed to save her. "Rias, you mind if I borrow Issei for some self-defense training later?" asked Naruto. Rias hummed in thought. Originally she was planning on having Issei train with Kiba to up his speed. But the unique opportunity of having him learn from someone who has much greater experience was a boon. "Yeah, just don't beat him down too hard now." Naruto had a determined grin. "By the time we're out of here he'll be a hell of a lot stronger." Issei felt a chill travel down his spine. "Aha. I'm in danger." "Speaking of training, would you mind if I showed Asia a bit more on what it means to be a medic? We may not use magic, but it doesn't mean we can't drill into her head some basics. After all, it seems we share similar biology." Rias looked at Asia and asked. What do you think, Asia, are you willing to undergo some medical training? Oh, of course, but you. I'd love to. Tsunade just sat around watching them discussing training plans. Since Sakura claimed Asia, she wondered if she could teach Koneko how to enhance her strength since she could use chakra. Well, I'll save that once I have an idea of what she can do. Devil. Naruto yawned as he walked back home with his apron over his shoulder as the moon hung in the sky. His boss was happy that Issei and Asia were so pleased with their noodles that he had given Naruto the day off tomorrow. Naruto wasn't surprised. Their shop was small and unpopular, but it definitely made some of the best ramen he had ever had. I wonder how it compares to Ichiraku. Naruto thought. Poof, and no way. The bowl of fresh ramen appeared on a surprised Naruto's lap. Koneko just looked at the bowl, seeing Naruto about to dig in when she poked him. Poke, poke. Naruto looked to his side and saw Koneko eyeing his ramen. She was a catgirl, so she probably had enhanced smell, meaning she could also probably enjoy the taste a hell of a lot more too. With great reluctance, Naruto did the one thing no one ever expected when it came to him and ramen. He offered Koneko his bowl. Here, Koneko, it looks like you're hungry. Koneko's eyes lit up for a brief moment, then she looked up at Naruto and said. Thank you. Sakura pinched herself. Is Naruto offering his own bowl of ramen? This has to be some kind of weird fever dream. He stopped in his tracks when he saw what stood in front of him. Stand under a tree was that pretty blonde-haired boy from the club the other day. Sitting on the edge of the fountain and playing with the water was Koneko as she waited patiently for their target. And standing in the middle of the area with his arms folded was Issei with a stern look on his face. He looked at Naruto. I need your help. Nope. Wait. Issei tried to catch Naruto before he ran out of his reach. All semblance of seriousness and control he had a moment ago was gone as Issei gripped his arm tightly. He looked at the blonde senior. Don't just run like that immediately. Of course I'm gonna run. Whenever I see your face it's like bells ringing in my head. I hear them saying get the fuck away. Get the fuck away. Shit's about to hit the fan. I mean goddamn man. The devils cringed once again, they sincerely hoped that this would be the last time. Whoops. Naruto said sheepishly. Sakura snorted and said. Whether you want it or not, trouble will always find you, Naruto. All four devils took a moment to grab their heads when a wave of pain ran through them. Issei recovered, Asia was taken by the fallen angels. The same one that killed us. Naruto just sighed. Why wasn't he surprised that bitch with the wings wasn't done screwing with them? I don't know what they're going to do, but they said something about using Asia's sacred gear. And I can guess that it isn't going to be for anything good. Naruto stood back up and rubbed his head. He looked between the three of them, and you plan to do what, exactly? But you said that she can't get involved with an affair like this without causing a big uproar. But she didn't say we couldn't do anything. Issei gripped his fist and gave a firm glare. We're gonna attack the fallen angels base in the church. Alright then. Naruto finally got to his question, so why are you coming to me? We can use all the help we could get. Naruto looked at him suspiciously. What exactly do you think I can do in this fight? It's so weird seeing you actually question and plan ahead, Naruto. Muttered Sakura. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and said. I've always been an on-the-fly kind of guy, so seeing myself grow into this is different. You're a pawn. The same as Haidu-kun. Kiba added into the conversation as he walked over to them. That means you can use the same base abilities that all pawns can use, promotion. That can help everyone in a fight. Koneko added in softly as she walked over to them as well. She looked up at the blonde. It should keep you safe. I still haven't changed my mind, you know. I don't have any reason to be a part of this war. Sorry but no. Naruto walked past the group of three and headed home. Asia gave herself up for me. Issei yelled as he tried everything he could to convince the older blonde for help. He looked down in shame. I know I have no right to ask you to risk your life for something like this. You only just met her today, and I haven't done anything remotely good enough to earn a favor from you in the short time we've talked. But she's gonna suffer if I can't do something. He looked at the blonde's back. Despite how you act, I know you're a good guy. If you saved the life of a worthless pervert like me, then please, help me save Asia. Because she damn well deserves it more than I do. You can do whatever you want afterwards. You can leave town. I can try to get Butchu to leave you alone. You can even take your revenge against me if that's what you want. Just help me now. What that girl deserves, a freedom she's never had, that's something worth fighting for. Issei was huffing slightly after yelling out at Naruto. He looked at the blonde's back and desperately pleaded, please. Breeding or not, I can say with confidence Naruto would help. Stated Sakura with a knowing smirk. I'm not some heartless bastard, of course I'd help. Retorted Naruto. Rias chuckled at the banter Naruto and Sakura had. Clearly, they've been through a lot together. The pawn, rook, and knight looked at the back of the older pawn as he just stood there silently. He spoke up, you're really gonna charge the enemy base, fighting an unknown amount of enemies with strength like the bitch who killed us, and try to take that girl back before she gets hurt. He shook his head, "You're an idiot. And you aren't going to stop until you do it. Even if everyone tells you it's impossible, you're still gonna charge in without thinking and just hope for the best. Just for the sake of girl." But just as Issei had started to lose hope, Naruto turned around with a smirk on his face. "You know, that sounds like something to fight for." "Oh really?" Rias had a greedy glint in her eye, she really wanted Naruto in her peerage. Said glint disappeared the moment she thought about trying to reincarnate him. She knew her other self got incredibly lucky. Ah well, even if she couldn't reincarnate him for now, she'd just enjoy his company. Koneko recognized the glint in Ria's eyes. Koneko would admit that having Naruto in the peerage would be fun. Sadly, it doesn't seem likely, they were already in an impossible situation to begin with. Issei smiled as Kiba and Koneko looked between each other in triumph. Naruto walked over to one of the trees and hung his apron over a branch. Like hell, he was going to bring another one into a fight like this. "I guess I'd feel pretty bad if I let an innocent girl like that get hurt without even doing anything if I could. So I'll help out. Just for her. And after this, you'll owe me forever." "Got it, fuckface." Issei just nodded his head eagerly. Not even making a comment on the unnecessary nickname he had been given. He walked back over to the little group and cracked his neck. "Alright then. Let's raise some hell. So who wants to read next?" asked Tsunade. "I'll do it and I'll actually finish a chapter this time," said Issei, knowing that the raid was next. He really hoped things worked out better than how it originally went. Tsunade nodded and handed Issei the book. Just as Issei was about to begin, a familiar light appeared. The light died out and a stunning young lady wearing a Kuo uniform appeared. She had magenta-like eyes, a yellowish-orange ribbon that kept her hair tied into a long ponytail that reached all the way down to her thighs, and a chest size that nearly matched Tsunade. This was Akeno Himejima. As Akeno gained clarity, she looked around the room and saw a couch. On one side she saw Issei sitting next to Asia, and next to them were two people she didn't know. One had pink hair with a diamond mark on her forehead, and she saw the same mark on the blonde-haired woman. The major thing she noticed from blonde was her chest. Never in her life did she feel inadequate, now she understood Koneko a bit more. Koneko's eye twitched, someone was insulting her. Seeing her best friend appear, Rias smiled and waved. "Akeno, over here." Akeno looked over to the familiar voice and saw Rias waving her towards a couch. She saw Rias sitting next to a blonde-haired young man with three whiskers that reminded her of a fox. Shockingly enough, she saw Koneko being head-patted by said young man. Inwardly she had a mischievous smirk. "Ra but you, I thought you weren't into romance." Rias blushed at that thought. It's not like that. I just thought I'd get to know Naruto better." Koneko was in her own little world. She could get used to this, head pats and sweets. Now that sounded like the life for her. Naruto just tilted his head in confusion. Was this romance? Nah, no way, he was just getting to know these two when a wild sadist appeared. While Akeno was happy Koneko was opening up, she had to get a jab in. "It looks like our little rook is having the time of her life." "Shut it, cow tits," retorted the rook. "You wound me with such words, Koneko-chan," Akeno said dramatically as she sat down next to Rias. Naruto felt a chill crawl down his spine when he saw the look Akeno was giving him. "So this is the type of man you're interested in, Rias." The chaos Akeno sowed upon her arrival distracted everyone on her side from another flash of light. Out of this light came a young man with blonde hair shades darker than Naruto or Tsunade. He had a mole underneath his left eye and wore the standard male Kuo uniform. Overall, he looked like a pretty boy from a girl's manga. This young man was Kiba Udo. The first thing Kiba noticed when he arrived was Akeno doing Akeno things. He also saw a young man sitting in between Koneko and Rias. He'd say hello if he got the chance, but with Akeno in her sadist mode, he'd avoid that for now. He saw Issei and Asia sitting next to two other unfamiliar people, he assumed that they were with a male. "Hello. I'm Kiba Udo, it's nice to meet you." "Oh. Aren't you cute?" Tsunade stated after taking a sip of her sake. "It's nice to meet you, Kiba, please forgive my master, she has a drinking problem." "I do not have a problem. I can stop whenever I want. Anyways, I'm Sakura Haruno, and this is my master Tsunade Senju." "I'm telling you, Sakura, I do not have a drinking problem. It's just a hobby that I thoroughly enjoy." Kiba's sweat dropped, how was he supposed to react to that? "Could one of you please explain what's going on and why we're here?" inquired Kiba as looked towards the group. Issei thought about ignoring him, but he remembered Kiba did help with rescuing Asia. So with great reluctance, he figured he should be a bit nicer to him, since Kiba did call him a comrade. "I gotcha, Kiba." As Issei began to recount the current events to Kiba, Asia, Sakura and Tsunade mingled among themselves. Asia talked about what she knew of her twilight healing, making Tsunade and Sakura curious about her world's medical field. On top of the supernatural, there was potential for all of them to learn a bunch of new things. The others noticed that Kiba arrived, but he was being told about the situation via Issei. Rias opted to do the same for Akeno. After they finished their explanations, Akeno had a sadistic smile. It looks like she'd get to play with more fallen angels. Naruto ignored that and decided to say hello to Kiba. After the two boys finished their introduction, Issei decided to ask if they could continue. Getting a nod from everyone, Issei began to read. The group of 4 devils were making their way to the abandoned church in town. It was silent as the tense atmosphere settled between all of them. They were all walking side by side as they made their way down the street. Koneko, then Naruto, then Issei, and at the end was Kiba. They had been walking in silence since they had left the park and were coming closer and closer to the edge of town. Just past the front of the forest would be the old abandoned church. And for the oncoming devils, the temporary base of the fallen angel faction that had snuck into town. They continued on quietly. I'm curious to see how different things will be with the addition of Naruto. What do you mean by that, Kiba? Sakura inquired. Well, when we initially attacked the church, we ran into Freed Selzen. We were able to force him to retreat. After that we ran into a lot of other stray exorcists, so I'm curious to see how you being here affects everything. The others wondered about that. They didn't think about how Naruto being in their world would change everything. Okay, I know this is a bit weird to ask when we are already making the march there, but do we have a plan? Naruto asked as he looked between the group. I mean, are we gonna sneak in and ambush them? Or are we just gonna play this by ear? Issei thought for a minute before they all stopped and looked at him. He panicked and kneeled down while holding his head in shock. Shit. I was so ready to charge in that I didn't even think of a plan. He looked back up at all of them. I guess we'll just improvise and hope for the best. Winging it was always my go-to plan when things hit the fan. Sakura chuckled. Of course you'd say that, it's what makes you unpredictable. Oh man. Naruto sighed as he shook his head. We're screwed, aren't we? Probably. Koneko replied immediately in a monotone voice. Naruto deflated at that. His other self didn't like winging it any more impossible. Actually, in all honesty, we most likely will be meeting some opposition in the way of saving Haidu-kun's nun friend. Kiba added as he started thinking, besides the main fallen angel in charge, there might be some others that followed her along. As well as the exorcist we met the other night and possibly others. Naruto nodded. Yeah, you might want to get ready with that whole multiple fallen angel idea. I met this asshole the other night that tried to make a shish kebab out of me. He scowled while crossing his arms. Bet money there's gonna be more of them to jump us. Issei stood back up. Geez, you really know how people think while fighting, don't you, Naruto-senpai? I guess it was a lucky break to have the #1 delinquent of Kuo Academy on our side, huh? Tsunade shook her head. You rely a bit too much on rumors, Issei. Remember, rumors are just that, rumors. Issei stopped reading to look at Tsunade. It's just from my experience most of them are pretty accurate. Exactly, from your experience. You were a normal child until recently. You haven't experienced a thing just yet. There's more to a person than just rumors. This is a favorite phrase from a subordinate of mine. Don't forget to look underneath the underneath. Issei was confused. What did she mean by that? Meanwhile, some of the Gremory peerage took that to heart, particularly Akeno and Koneko, both for their own reasons. You put way too much credit into a nickname some guys in school gave me. And you should really stop trying to summarize who I am just by the name. Issei gave him a light scowl. Well, sorry, but from my experience, the nicknames they pass around usually do a pretty good job. He pointed to himself. I mean, don't you think my nicknames as a depraved pervert suit me pretty well? Naruto shrugged his shoulder. I don't know. I usually don't waste even the most minimal amount of brain power thinking about you. Issei glared and was about to retort before Kiba raised his arm in the way. Excuse me for asking Uzumaki-san, but something is bothering me. Kiba looked towards the older blonde. How did you come to be called a delinquent and given such a bad reputation? I mean, you do not seem nearly as bad as everyone says you are. At most you are a bit snarky and have a rough personality. Issei scoffed. Rough is putting it lightly. Naruto's hand instantly shot out and karate chopped Issei in the throat. Kiba and Koneko watched as the brown-haired pervert gagged and fell on his back as he gasped for air as Naruto cupped his chin. Well, it was all just a bunch of stuff that piled up after a while, but if I had to say what started it all, it would have to be an unfortunate meeting I had with Akeno Himejima. What part of meeting me is unfortunate? The whole sadist thing is freaky as all hell. UFU, I can't wait to see you in pain. Naruto shivered at that. Sadists were freaking weird. The small group of students all looked at the blonde in surprise at what he said. He nodded. Yeah, it all started a little bit after I first transferred here. Devil. It was gym time and class was close to ending. It was still in the first week of Naruto's transfer into Kuo Academy on a scholarship provided to him by the board of the school. It had quickly spread that there was a new kid who had moved here from parts unknown. And while some people had approached him for various reasons, no one had really gotten to know him yet. Rias perked up at this. Naruto had gotten a scholarship by the board of the school. So her brother probably had something to do with this. She'd keep that to herself until she could find an appropriate time to talk about it. And of course, when you are not only a new kid but moved here from possibly a different country, what with a rather odd accent in his voice, you're susceptible to bullying from local jocks. Of course, they aren't always expecting someone to fight back. The door to the girls' locker room broke open as Naruto tackled one of the guys that tried to extort him. He tripped them up and planted them on their back before he stood back up to intercept the last man standing. The muscle head yelled as he tried to tackle Naruto with a judo move he had learnt in his club. But Naruto just used a bench as a stepping platform before jumping over his head and landing behind him. The large punk tried to catch him again, but just as he turned around he received a kick to the face before passing out. Naruto stood back up and wiped his forehead as he looked at the unconscious guys at his feet and the two others lying in the dirt outside. He chuckled, maybe that will teach you guys to try a more subtle tactic than walking up to me and demanding money. Naruto took a moment to look around at the room he had fought his way into, where the hell am I? Brah. Naruto was tackled into a locker by one of the guys he thought he had knocked out and banged his face into the metal. Before the punk could go for a second strike, Naruto spun around and jabbed him in the face. Before grabbing his outstretched arm and slamming him into the locker and grabbing his head and slamming it into the same locker he had just hit. Rias just stared blankly at the meaningless violence. They had students like these in Kuo Academy. A talk with Sona would have the issue fixed right away, can't have people like that representing the school. Rias knew Naruto was in the right for defending himself, it was just a shame he ended up in the girls' locker room. His reputation would be in shambles, but by the looks of it, he wouldn't care about that in the first place. The muscle head slid down the locker door before it slowly creaked open from the continued stress. Naruto hissed in pain as he gently touched his aching face. He looked down at the drops of blood on his fingers and realized he had gotten a bloody nose from slamming his face. He groaned, damn it. Stupid pricks. Can this get any worse? Did you really have to ask that, Naruto? Issei asked as he palmed his face. What? It's not like it can actually get worse. Everyone deadpanned at that. It always gets worse. Flop. Naruto looked down to see something had fallen out of the open locker. He tilted his head in confusion before he reached down and picked it up. He grabbed the straps with both hands and held it out to get a better look. It was a large black frilly brasserie. And he was not kidding when he used the term large. If he was an immature little brat he'd take the opportunity to put it on his head then run around making a fool out of himself. Or maybe go and see if he could carry 2 watermelons in the cups. Seriously, who in the school could possibly be this big? Akeno's eyes widened in surprise, those were hers, she'd recognize that brand anywhere. She gazed at Naruto and Hege's back, his eyes widened in realization. Look, you saw the events play out from the beginning, it wasn't my other self's fault. Naruto tried to reason. Oh, don't worry. I understand. You do? She does? Everyone else had the same thought. Of course I do. Naruto slowly lowered the bra out of his view and saw a beautiful woman about his age with black hair and a long ponytail. She had a sickeningly sweet smile that could ease the pain in any nervous soul, and she directed it solely at the blonde in front of her. The whiskered man looked around her and saw a dozen other girls at the door peeking around at them. And then Naruto somehow looked at their situation from a third-person view. The strange foreign blonde exchange student standing in the middle of the girls' locker room after its door was broken down. He was surrounded by unconscious jocks, he had broken into the locker of Akeno Himejima and it appeared he had been holding and looking at her bra long enough to get a nosebleed. Naruto stared at the ponytailed beauty and looked down at her assets as they stressed the fabric of her gym clothes. He looked down at the bra in his hands before he held it out to her, here. I believe this is yours. Smooth, real smooth. Tsune deadpanned. What else was I supposed to do? Akeno just giggled lightly before she cracked her knuckles. Which was then followed by each and every girl in her class that was standing outside of the room. On one hand, Issei felt bad for Naruto there, he didn't deserve a pervert's punishment. On the other, he wanted to be the one to hold on to Akeno's bra. Why not him, damn it. Devil. After that, guys started trying to work me over for cash and girls sorta just stayed away from me. I mean, to be fair, I probably would have somehow screwed everything up anyway if I waited long enough, but breaking into the girls' locker room and raiding a bra had a strong hand in advancing that problem. The rest of the present Gremory group just stared at him with blank faces as they let his story sink in. Degenerate. Koneko said with half-lidded eyes. Naruto nearly stopped petting Koneko at that moment. Oh, come on. I just told you my side of the story. Kiba chuckled, well, I suppose that explains why Akeno-san treated you so coldly when you were in the clubhouse. But I have to be honest, I've heard so many different stories and rumors about you that I can't believe that's how everything began. He looked over to the brunette, it's actually quite funny, don't you think, Haidu-kun? But he didn't get a reply as they saw Issei with his head lowered and his shoulders shaking. Kiba tried to touch his shoulder. Haidu, why? Why did this bastard get to hold the casing for the biggest and most wanted pair of in the school? I want to hold it too. Issei cried indignantly as he pointed at Naruto. He then realized what they were doing and tried to compose himself. Shit, no. Not now. Asia comes first. Must focus on saving Asia. He started repeating to himself, first Asia, then Tsunade, Sakura and Koneko all looked at Issei with disgust. Pervert degenerate filth. Issei felt like crying at that, he did nothing wrong. So what if he expresses himself more than he should? He was born to live an honest life, what was wrong with that? Naruto and Kiba just watched as the poor boy was verbally assaulted. Naruto deadpanned, way to get your priorities straight man. Koneko followed, pervert. As Issei continued to psych himself up, Naruto let a small smile come over his face. He smiled and looked over to Issei, see, I told you your true character would start showing itself soon. Issei felt his concentration break and looked over to his blonde senior. He blinked in confusion, huh? What do you mean? I mean trying to save that little nun girl even though it will be dangerous. Looks like you found something you actually can live for now, huh? He chuckled, I told you you'd get over that harem dream sooner or later. Issei knew he'd never get over his dream of being harem king. But that didn't mean he wouldn't try to live for Asia and the rest of the peerage. He just hoped his other self would understand the same thing. Then he read the next few lines and all hope was lost. Ahaha. Issei laughed evilly as a part of his face was shadowed and his eyes took on a menacing look. No, Naruto-senpai, you've got it all wrong. You see, the harem plan has always been my dream. Ever since I was a little child getting his first chubby. The pervert proclaimed proudly as manly tears ran down his face. Once I have saved Asia, I will go right back to my plan of being the harem king. Issei felt the withering glare of the three ball crushers. He had the gut feeling if he tried to say anything, well he'd lose something precious. Okay. I take back what I just said. Koneko sent Issei a small scowl, super pervert. It doesn't matter what you call me. I proudly stand by what I am. So go ahead. Call me what you want. Koneko continued, filthy bottom-feeding scum of the earth that should just crawl under a rock and die. Issei looked down at the little rook in pained shock, oh okay, that actually hurt my feelings a little. Oh, speaking of calling ourselves terrible names. Kiba looked over at Issei, since we are walking into the unknown together, is it alright if I call you Issei-kun now? Issei just gave a small nod, sure. I've got no problem with that. Great. Kiba sent him a beautiful smile, and you can call me Udo in return. Issei returned the beautiful smile with one of his own, I'd rather get castrated than refer to you in a friendly manner. Naruto lazily raised his hand, I'll just stick to calling you fuckface. Issei glared at the blonde before he resorted to addressing the beautiful little angel in their group. He looked to the short white-haired girl and tried to appeal to her, Koneko-chan, you can follow in your senpai's footsteps and start using my name if you like. She gave a small nod, you got it fuckface senpai. Everyone but Naruto and Koneko had a horrified face. How could such words come out of a sweet little thing like her? Naruto just asked for Kaneko's favorite sweet and it popped into existence. Koneko shared a part of it with him and the two continued on as if all was right with the world. Issei and Kiba looked at the freshman in horrified shock. Issei panicked, Koneko-chan. What just came out of that little mouth of yours? Kiba gave her a fairly stern look, Koneko-chan, you shouldn't be using language like that. It's unbecoming of a sweet girl like you. She felt a little sad at being told off and looked down, I'm sorry. Haha, don't blame her. Naruto added with a small smile as he patted her head, she only said that because I'm such a terrible influence on younger people. He looked down at her, right. She nodded her head as he looked at the other men, see. The pawn and knight just gave their senior a flat stare before they finally arrived at their destination. The small group looked at the abandoned run-down church that was currently the base of operations for the fallen angel group. The group dropped their knees to hide better in the surrounding foliage and looked around for any sight of attackers. Issei furrowed his eyes and raised his arm, sacred gear. His whole left forearm was covered by his red gauntlet as he made a fist, okay. Let's go. Whoa. Hold on. Kiba grabbed his shoulder to stop him from charging in foolishly. He looked at the church tentatively, we need to think this through for a moment. I don't mean to interrupt my other self, but we pretty much just walked in once Koneko kicked the door down. Said girl shrugged. They already knew we were there. How much different is this situation compared to how it happened to you guys? Sakura asked out of curiosity. Well there hasn't been too much of a difference, I think really the main difference so far is that we have Naruto now. Sakura sighed at that. All we can do is wait and see then. He's right. There's no reason for us all to die just because you wanted to knock down the front door. Naruto added as he looked around, what about scouting the back? Unlikely. Koneko looked up at him as she pulled a pair of kitten gloves over her hands, the fallen angels would probably plan for infiltration from behind. Okay, Naruto's eyes continued to roam before he looked at the roof, what about up there? Peek through the glass. Use the banisters as cover and a platform. Prepare the next plan of attack. Kiba thought for a minute, that might work. If we use our wings to fly up there and check. Issei looked down disappointedly, I still can't fly with my wings. Before Kiba could comfort Issei's insecurity, Naruto actually looked at each of them with genuine surprise. Wait. We have wings. Seriously? I thought that was just a gimmick she pulled to freak me out. And they actually work for flight. Koneko nodded, yes. Imagine you're a bat and you're spreading your wings. Naruto blinked for a moment before he closed his eyes and concentrated. Two black crooked devil wings popped out of his lower back and spread out behind him. He looked back in surprise, whoa. He focused for a moment and watched as they disappeared back into his body. He smiled. And then started to spread his wings out, then back and out, then back and out, then back and out. Here's the brat I know. The moment you get something new and cool you lose yourself in it. That looks so fun, I want wings. Naruto, you can already fly, you don't need wings. But granny, they're wings. No. Rias and Koneko sweat dropped at that. We're all strong people this weird. Koneko grabbed his wing and shook her head, not now. Issei just looked between all of them and yelled, can we think of something? We're trying to save someone here, not play a stupid strategy game like Othello. Or Go. Or Yahtzee. Ah, there's the difference. Kiba pointed out. What do you mean? Sakura had a questioning look. When we went through this, we fought Fried inside of the church. Instead, it seems he decided to ambush us. Do you think that means there's more enemies in the church this time? It's possible, I suppose we'll find out soon enough. All four devils felt the need to dive to safety as a blade of light slashed down the trees and bushes they were hiding behind. The figure holding the sword then pulled out a pistol and effortlessly aimed it at Naruto and Koneko as they were crouched on the ground. Naruto felt his reflexes kick in and grabbed the little freshman before diving to the side out of harm's way. He rolled on the ground and kept Koneko safe as the man stopped shooting. Oh man. I was getting tired of waiting for you guys. The white-haired priest cackled as he looked around at the devils surrounding him and grinned, I mean seriously. All of you, hiding in the bush, talking while you plan how to orchestrate the climax. Can you spell tease? Issei sent a venomous glare at the priest as he spat his name out, Fried Selzen. The stray exorcist spotted the brunette and quivered a little little devil kun, so good to see you. But come on man, don't look at me like that, I don't know what I'll do with myself. Fried then looked around at the devils and counted them off, weak little devil kun, sexy handsome devil san, adorable little miss devil, and I don't know you. Naruto took that as a good sign. I don't want to be known by this freak. If I see him I'm kicking his ass. Dead in line Naruto, I called first dibs. Besides once I'm done with him, he'll be a stain on the wall. Sakura stated as she cracked her knuckles. Naruto looked at this weirdo before looking at Koneko, who the hell is his freak? Pervert exorcist. Really dangerous. Issei stood back up and pointed at the psychopath, where's Asia you bastard? Breed beamed, oh, you're here for Lalasia Tan, huh? I can't blame you for being interested. He wheezed out in a sultry voice, when I last saw her inside, she was dressed in a flimsy little one-piece dress and getting chained to a cross like the Lord and Savior himself. Issei's eyes widened in shock as his teeth started to gnash at what he just said. Fried then seemed to hug himself, I so wanted to get some playtime in before they started the ritual, but Rainer-sama said she'd gut me like a chicken if I came close to her. That woman sure knows how to hit the masochist in me. But hey, maybe she'll let me cut up and play with the corpse when she's done. It's the least I deserve after everything I've done. After reading that line Issei gripped the book tightly. Tsunade noticed this and after taking a sip from her infinite bottle of sake, she began lecturing Issei. Listen well Rugrid, it's okay to feel anger, it happens to the best of us. But you can't let it control your actions. You do and you'll just end up putting you and your friends in danger. Issei thought about what she meant as he looked towards Asia. If anything happened to her and he couldn't do anything to stop it, he'd lose it. It already happened once. Asia saw the look Issei was giving her and she gave him comforting smile. It worked out before, she was sure it would work out again. Rah! Issei roared as he charged forward with the intent of making the exorcist's face profoundly concave. Fried knew he shouldn't be fantasizing anymore as he aimed his gun right between the pawn's eyes. Get down. Kiba yelled as he swept Issei's legs out from under him and pulled out his sword to block the light bullets. With an experienced hand, Fried blocked Kiba's sword with his own and aimed behind his head at Naruto and Koneko. Issei frowned at that. Hopefully that training session with Naruto would help him out and stop him from being so reckless. Naruto pushed Koneko out of the way as he dove to the side and started running away as the bullets riddled the path behind him. Fried laughed crazily as he watched the other blonde dive away from his bullets as he swung his sword to intercept the knight's. Ha 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 ha. Come on lil devils. At least try to stand your ground. I'm only at half-mast seeing you all squirm and run in terror. If you actually tried to fight back, I would be. Fried watched as Kiba jumped far away to give himself plenty of space as a large shadow started filling the area. Fried turned around to see an entire tree completely uprooted out of the ground and held overhead with him in its direct path. And standing at the base of it, the little white-haired girl that was pushed out of his sight was hoisting the thing up with her little arms. Tsunade whistled at Koneko's strength. It was pretty good, especially for one so young. She wondered how much stronger Koneko would be if she taught her how to enhance her attacks with chakra. Fried gave a little nod. Actually, it probably would kind of look like that if it was at an angle. Koneko brought the tree down and tried to crush Fried as he desperately dove to the side to preserve himself. He stumbled on his feet before aiming the barrel of his gun at the young girl's head. "You insufferable little gak." Fried fell flat on his face after Naruto made a quick slide and pulled his legs out from beneath him. Fried held his nose in pain and tried to glare at the blonde that pulled him down, but was met with a swift kick in the jaw by the whiskered man. Fried felt his gums bleed and grabbed his weapons to kill the blonde. "Yusanuva, oh shit." Fried saw the tree come down for him again and jumped away while still close to the ground. He rolled in the dirt and grass for a moment before he aimed up and shot at Koneko as she ducked behind the tree. Fried pulled himself up on his feet as he was starting to regret fighting 4 devils at the same time. He looked to the side to see Kiba coming at him with a strange blade and blocked it with his light blade. He finally saw the opportunity and aimed his gun at Kiba's face. Bang. Kiba had a smirk on his face. He knew what was coming. Fried would be in for a surprise. They all looked in worry as Koneko watched Fried pull the trigger. "Yudo-senpai." Bang. The light bullet left the barrel and came a centimeter away from piercing Kiba's face before it evaporated into dust and was sucked up over his head. What? Fried looked up to see Kiba's strange sword with an open top that revealed a black vortex that swallowed up the light bullet. He watched in disbelief as his light blade was broken down and reduced to nothing, leaving him with just a hilt. Fried was dumbfounded. What the? The shinobi looked in awe. The vortex looked like Kakashi and Obito's Kamui. "What is that, Kiba?" "That's pretty damn cool. It's Holy Eraser. It's a sword made to eat light. My sacred gear is Sword Birth. It allows me to create any demonic sword I can think of." Naruto whistled at that. "So it's limited by your imagination. If you're creative enough you could probably think of some ridiculous swords." "Ah, I didn't think of it like that." Naruto's sweat dropped at that. It'd be completely useless if Kiba didn't get creative. "Holy Eraser. My sword of darkness that swallows up all light. It comes in handy to have a sacred gear like Sword Birth that lets me create any kind of sword I want on a whim." Kiba smirked, and speaking of sacred gears, Kiba jumped back and out of the way to reveal to Fried the brown-haired pawn that was glaring at him. He yelled, "Promotion. Rook." And as his body felt the surge of power that increased his physical capabilities, he held out his gauntlet, Sacred Gear. Boost. The fully charged Issei charged forward while Fried was frozen in place for a moment. He shrugged his shoulders. "Oh well. At least I'm going out with a ragin'. Ha." Issei planted his fist in Fried's face and felt a satisfying crunch from his shattered nose. The exorcist's body flew back and broke through a tree before he impacted against another one and dropped down to the ground limp. Sakura whistled at that punch. It wasn't boulder crushing, but it had good form. "Nice punch, Issei." Issei blushed from being praised. "Ah, thanks. In the end I still got to punch his face in." "Yes." Tsunade got curious and asked, "What's promotion and what does it do?" Rias realized she never explained the evil P system. A light flush of pink could be seen on her face. "I never explained the evil P system, I only briefly mentioned reincarnation was based on chess. Rara is my king too busy thinking about a certain whiskered blonde. Akeno." Naruto only tilted his head in confusion. Why would he be in Ria's thoughts? Koneko noticed this and deadpanned. He really was a dense idiot. Regaining her composure, Rias began to explain a bit more about the evil P system. How the rook took on defensive and offensive properties, while the knight took on pure speed. The queen took on the properties of both rook and knight, while the pawn was allowed the ability to promote. Promotion itself was a unique ability to the pawn. When in enemy territory of the king, it would allow them to take on the properties of rook, knight, or queen. After all was said and done, the reading continued. The little group of devils all came together as Naruto looked at Issei in surprise. He said, "That's the promotion thing you guys were talking about." He nodded in surprise as he was feeling a little more optimistic about their chances. He looked down at the young freshman. "Nice job with the tree. It was fun seeing you play whack-a-mole." Koneko nodded. "Thank you for pushing me out of the way long enough for me to do that. Don't mention it." Issei took a chance to breathe and calm down before he looked between them. "Now what?" Naruto didn't even wait before he started casually walking towards the front door of the church. The others devils called out, "Wait. What are you doing? What happened to sneaking in?" Naruto looked back at them and then gestured for them to turn around. They all glanced back to see the broken trees, burning bushes, bullet-riddled ground and generally destroyed landscape. They then realized that they couldn't have announced their presence any louder unless they did it on purpose. Naruto moved towards the door. "Let's go." Kiba snorted at that. In the end, they still entered the church the same way. Let me guess, Kiba, it was the same in the end? Asked a knowing Sakura. Kiba could only nod as he tried to compose himself. Devil. The bulk of the Grimoire peerage ignored the unsettling feeling they had walking into a church and looked around at its rundown interior. The benches and walls were damp and splintered, covered in dust from no visitors in who knows how long. There was mold building up in the corners and edges of the walls, and a musty stench had settled into the atmosphere. Issei was completely underwhelmed by the sight. This is their base of operations. Geez, you'd think a group of fallen angels would choose a little more glamorous place to work out of. Koneko added while she looked around, we operate from a room in an abandoned school building. Oh? Right. Rias took offense to that. Hey. The clubroom isn't that bad, right? Rias was met with silence. Oh come on. I did my best to renovate it. Tsunade felt bad for Rias and offered her a cup of sake. A sniffle could be heard from Rias. I tried my best. Kiba whistled, getting all of their attention, before he jerked his head towards a back door that led into a stairway towards the basement. He faced it. I believe this might be what we are looking for. Issei ran up next to him. Asia's down there. It would be our best bet. He looked around. That crazy exorcist said that they were holding a ceremony for her. And I can't see anywhere else that would give them ample space and time to do so. So now we're going down into the deep, dank, possibly dungeon-esque basement to stop some weird ceremony in a church. Naruto chided as he shook his head. Fuck. And here I am thinking devils were the weird ones. Not just the weird ones, the vile abominations that should be wiped out from existence. The group of devils looked up in surprise to see three figures with large black wings standing on the banisters overhead. The Grimoire peerage were surprised. That was definitely different. Naruto saw their surprised looks. Everything okay? Is this where things begin to differ for y'all? Rias nodded. Yeah, this is where things change. Akeno and I took on those three fallen angels. Oh. If that's the case, that begs the question. What are the two of you doing in this? Tsunade questioned. That's the thing, I don't know. My whole plan was to take out the backup while Issei, Kiba, and Koneko took out the ones inside of the church. If I had to guess, I assume my other felt with Naruto there, 2 pawns with promotion would suffice. Tsunade accepted her answer. She couldn't blame the girl, she was concerned as well. It was obvious to her. One of them looked like a young girl, no older than Koneko. She had light blonde hair and 2 short ponytails, and she was dressed in gothic Lolita attire. The next person was an adult woman that appeared several years older than them. She was wearing a partially open trench coat that revealed ample cleavage and her long navy blue hair coming down her back. And finally, in the center, was a tall man in a trench coat with a fedora on his head. Also known as Donaseek. Naruto lowly stated as he glared at the fallen angel that had attacked him several nights earlier. Halwarner, the tall woman, smiled smugly. We were genuinely surprised to see a ragtag group of devils beat up Freed and march their way into our church. Middled, the young girl laughed haughtily. I find it funny they think they can do anything to stop us. Once Rainer finishes the ceremony, we'll be set for life and we can exterminate all these pathetic devils. They can talk all they want, it's usually the ones who talk the most that are the weakest. Tsunade stated. Everyone couldn't help but agree with that sentiment. Some more pathetic than others. Donaseek added as his eyes landed on the familiar blonde in the crowd he still had unfinished business with. He grinned menacingly. Hello baby devil, your arm's still aching. I don't know. Do you still stink like partially degraded wrappers and crap? Naruto replayed sharply as he wasn't in the mood to face this prick again. Issei brought his fists up. What do we do? You should go on ahead. What? I can't do that. Well, we've got 3 devils standing against 3 fallen angels and you need to save the girl from peril. Naruto looked back at him and gestured for him to move along. Don't keep her waiting. He's right, Issei-kun. It would be best for you to try and stop the ceremony before it begins. Koneko pulled her gloves on tighter. Don't screw up. Issei looked between the 3 of them before he nodded his head and ran down the stairs. Issei had the sinking feeling, it wouldn't matter. Asia would still die, he wouldn't be able to save her. The fallen angels just laughed. Don't think that just because you send one inexperienced devil down there that anything is going to stop. Enough chat. I'm sick of looking at your smug faces. Naruto walked forward and raised his arms up the same way he saw Issei do earlier. He thought back at their explanations of the pawn's special ability and decided to test it out. He yelled, promotion. Queen. It was silent in the main hall of the abandoned church as the fallen angels prepared for the pawn's increase in skill. Koneko and Kiba got ready to fight with their own stances. It was silent and tense until Naruto looked back at his fellow devils. Okay, I don't feel any different. What? Rias yelled out in shock. She didn't expect the extra piece to fail there. Of all the times, the supposed special piece didn't do a damn thing. Naruto looked to Rias. I guess that wasn't normal. Of course it isn't normal. I can accept not being able to appear before you or summon you. But you not being able to use promotion to help yourself pisses me off. That's the whole point of the pawn piece. Naruto was genuinely surprised, he didn't think she'd care this much. Koneko and Kiba looked at him with wide eyes before looking at each other. Kiba took a step forward, are you sure? Check again or something. I'm told you're supposed to feel a well of new power burning up inside you when you do that, right? Well, I don't feel any different. Naruto said as he poked at his chest in an attempt to jump-start it. He looked at them, is there something wrong with it or? The spear of light was embedded closely near Naruto's foot before it exploded and sent the devils stumbling back. Donasi came flying down until he hovered a few feet over the ground and laughed, looks like I was right. You barely even qualify as a devil. Hahaha. The Gremory family must have been scrapping the very bottom of the barrel if they're resorted to accepting you. Naruto pushed himself up on his hands and knees and shook his head as the dust settled. He said in a low tone, figures I couldn't get a helping hand when I needed it. But you know what, that's fine. Naruto jumped up to his feet and pointed at the floating fallen angel in anger. I don't need any help from this devil shit to kick your ass, you little chicken bitch. You won't be calling me bottom of the barrel when I'm clipping you wings. So come on. Donasi grinned menacingly as he started throwing more projectiles at Naruto as the whiskered blonde darted down the aisle of chairs and out the door. The fallen angel didn't waste a moment as he followed the senior Kuo student out of the church. Heh. Chakra or no chakra, I can still beat that bird brain's ass. So your others shouldn't worry about me. But you can't promote. Kiba stated in worry. You really think I need that? His ass is grass. Kiba was worried as he watched the blonde lead the man away. Uzumaki-san, wait. Kiba pulled out his sword and blocked a spear of light from skewering him sideways as the other two fallen angels laughed. Calwerner looked down, and where do you think you're going? Middle held her weapon over her head before chucking it down, we're just getting started. Kiba and Koneko jumped around as they dodged the spears of light that started hailing down on them like summer rain. Kiba used his blade to parry the spears from piercing them as Koneko grabbed a bench and spun around before throwing it through a window. The Gremory Knight and Rook used the shattered window as an escape route into the forest. The fallen angels followed closely behind as the devils darted around the trees. Kiba and Koneko ran besides each other as the trees and ground around them exploded into gravel and dirt. The two devils looked between each other and nodded before Kiba darted forward in a burst of speed. He left Koneko behind before he circled around the trees and charged past her to attack the fallen angels. Kiba jumped up and swiped his sword at the smaller fallen angel before he crossed weapons with Calwerner. His blade and her spear sent sparks around them before he summoned another blade and blocked Middle's spear as well. With his years of experienced swordplay, Kiba fought the two fallen angels off while they tried to pierce his body with light. The fallen angels clicked their tongues in anger as they realized they wouldn't be able to beat this impossibly fast swordsman in a challenge of blades. Kiba forced them back long enough for him to charge to the side and cut through a tree. He then bucked back and dove for another tree before running for another. He sliced through the base of 5 trees before they collapsed and converged on the spot the fallen angels were standing. Good shit, Kiba. Naruto cheered. Kiba showed a genuine smile, it had been a long time since he felt this relaxed. Was it because Naruto reminded him of his childhood friends? He couldn't answer that, but he'd be damn sure to enjoy the moment. The trees shook the ground as they all fell, and Middleton Calwerner floated over them. The little gothic girl coughed, cough, was he trying to crush us? I don't know. Calwerner looked around to try and spot the quick-footed blonde, but found nothing. She narrowed her eyes, damn it. Where did that measly little devil run off to? Middle looked around as well before something crossed her mind. She looked at her partner, hey, speaking of devils running off, wasn't there another one we were chasing? Some little girl. Where did she? Here. The fallen angels looked up just in time to see the white-haired Rook over their head after jumping of an adjacent tree branch. She cupped her fist in her hand and brought it down in a hammer strike, knocking Calwerner into Middle and sending them both hurtling into the ground hard and fast enough to form a small crater. Middle was instantly knocked out from being smothered by Calwerner's larger and heavier body and taking the blunt of the harsh landing into the ground. Calwerner weakly pushed herself up on her elbows to try and stand up, but Koneko landed besides her and punched her across the face. The short girl looked at the two fallen angels she had knocked unconscious and gave a small nod of accomplishment before she took off her gloves. She heard footsteps approach from behind and turned around to see the blonde-haired knight sheathing his sword. Kiba smiled and walked up to the shorter girl, I'm glad you caught the gist of my plan. It was much easier knowing the muscle in our group had my back, don't mention it. Kiba held up his hand with palm facing out as Koneko caught on to what he wanted and high-fived him. Kiba laughed a little before looking back at the church, so, I wonder how everyone else is doing. Naruto couldn't help but say, nice punch. Back to Koneko. She smiled knowing she got shit done. Devil. Meanwhile, Issei was making his way into the basement of the church as quickly as he could as all lights started to fade the further down he went. He started using the wall for support in case he tripped while making his way down. The new pawn couldn't help but feel a pit grow in the center of his stomach as fear started taking root. What was going to happen when he reached the bottom of the stairs? What was all this crap about a ceremony and what did it have to do with Asia? Were the rest of his team going to be okay? These thoughts raced through Issei's head over and over until he spotted a faint shimmering light at the end of the staircase. Issei walked into the room and his eyes widened in shock. On the opposite side of the room, there was a large cross placed against the wall with a beautiful young blonde girl in a short white dress hanging from it wrapped in chains. Between them was more than a dozen men in robes with their hands clasped together in prayer and a light sword attached to their hips. And standing right beside the cross, looking up at it as Asia let out a pained moan. "What the hell?" Naruto muttered when he saw the horrendous scene. He clenched his fist in anger. As he looked towards Asia, all he saw was an innocent girl. She didn't deserve this. His eyes glowed red for a minute before he felt the calming energy of his friend within him. Rias noticed the color of Naruto's eyes change. She shrugged it off for now, she figured it would be best if he let himself explain the change. Was the girl he once called his girlfriend? In the same clothes she wore on their first and last date together. Rainer, the fallen angel. Issei yelled, "Asia." Some of the priests went silent as Issei's yell reverberated through the room. Rainer blinked in surprise before looking at the back of the room as Asia noticed someone yell her name. She weakly lifted her head and saw the man standing at the end of the crowd, her eyes widening in shock as a warm sensation spread through her chest. A tear of joy trailed down her cheek as she smiled and whimpered, "Issei-san." Rainer sighed, exasperated by Issei's arrival once again ruining the moment. She looked up at him lazily, "Are you serious? Gee, how many times do I have to kill you before the lesson starts to stick?" Issei looked at the black-haired beauty, "You know," he glared at her. "Rainer, let Asia go. Or else I'm going to take her from you by force." Rainer raised an eyebrow at his exclamation before she let out a small giggle. She looked at the devil, "Whoa, you really fell head over heels for her, didn't you? Geez, Issei-kun, I might start feeling jealous if you keep hurting my feelings like this." She lowered her arms to her side and nodded, "Okay, you can have her." The light started to shine from Asia's chest and illuminate the entire room. Rainer smiled, "The ceremony is over anyway." Asia's body went rigid and she threw her head back as tears formed in her eyes. "Aya. What is she doing to Asia?" an angered Sakura asked. "She's stealing my sacred gear." The shinobi knew the implications of that. How could they not? The situation was eerily similar to an extraction of a Jinchuriki's tailed beast. "So this is how you die? I'm sorry, my being there couldn't change that." Nonsense. In the end I was saved and I'm sure it'll end up the same for my other. Truthfully, I'm glad it happened. I got to meet Issei-san and the others and now I have a family. Asia had a gentle smile. She really meant what she said. Naruto had a small smile at that because he could relate. His decision was made. Hey. When we finished this chapter, there was something I didn't include in my introduction. I'll let you know more about it then. Sakura and Tsunade widened their eyes. Was he really going to let them know about his status? They weren't against it, it was Naruto's decision after all. It wasn't like they could stop him anyways. What worried them was if this ragtag group of kids would accept him. They seemed genuine, but you could never know. Ria's curiosity was piqued. This probably had something to do with his eyes changing color. After the peerage gave him a brief nod and understanding, the reading continued. "Asia." Issei yelled in panic as he heard his friend's desperate scream of agonizing pain. He charged forward in an attempt to get to Asia, but had to jump back as a light sword swiped at his neck. Issei growled and activated his promotion to queen. He felt a surge of power build up inside him before he dashed forward and punched a priest across the face. He dodged and smacked another priest away before several more filled their place. As Issei tried to fight his way forward, Asia's screams continued and became more dreadful with each passing second. Her back was arched in pain as a green light glowed against the skin of her chest. Issei tried to make his way towards his friend but was blocked off by several priests pushing him back. The little game of strength continued for a few moments until the light from Asia grew as bright as possible and a beautiful green light floated out of Isa's chest. The room went silent as Asia's screams died out and she was frozen for a moment. But then her back went slack and the light faded from her eyes as the green ball floated down into Rainer's open hands. She placed it against her chest and looked like she struggled for a moment before it disappeared and two green sparkles appeared on her ears. The fallen angel smiled at her success and gently touched her prize. She chuckled, "Finally. We can win." Issei looked on in horror as Rainer disappeared in a flurry of black feathers and Asia's eyes slowly started to close. He felt something snap as he gritted his teeth until he tasted blood. I know it works out in the end, but it still pisses me off that you had to go through that in the first place. You really are a kind person, Naruto-san. I wonder if this is what it's like to have an older brother. Well, I've always wanted a sister. After very little thought, Naruto made a declaration. You know what? We're family now, Asia. If someone tries to mess with you, they'll have to go through me. I'll find a way to cross dimensions and kick their ass. Asia's eyes widened at that. Really, can I call you big brother? Sure. A wide grin could be seen on Naruto's face. Tsunade and Sakura just snorted in laughter. Naruto would always be unpredictable. Meanwhile, Rias and the rest of her peerage stared in shock. He was completely serious. As this happened, the mysterious voice heard everything. He had an idea to implement.